Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Innu, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Neil Harden. I am chairing today's panel. With me in the room is Richard Whitbread and Gail Anderson. Jason Roberts is the recording secretary, and the assessors today will be Merrick Froelich and Stephen Lobenstein. To the Zoom participants of the hearing, please note you are placed in the waiting room until your property is called upon. When it is your turn, you will be admitted into the meeting. Kindly follow along in the City of Winnipeg's Border Division YouTube channel for the hearing process. Once the host admits you into the hearing, please close and mute your YouTube player. You'll be then permitted to speak with respect to your property. Once your hearing has concluded, you can leave the meeting. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment rule in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony. Anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the board. The board is appointed annually by council and is independent of it in the city administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen Bench if the matter pertains to exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application be brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We'll be hearing items 1 through 7 on our docket today. Mr. Robertson, please affirm the assessors and applicants' testimony.
Mr. Assessor.
Yes.
Please state your full name.
Merrick Froelich.
Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Mr. Applicant. Please state your full name. Rod Slaughter. Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes. Thank you. You may be seated.
Okay. The first property on today's docket is 1725 St. James Street. Mr. Froelich, you can proceed.
Sure thing. File number is 22-1902. Roll number is 13-00123-6500. The initial assessment breakdown for 40S was $1,825,000. And for 60T was $59,050,000. Since the initial roll was sent out in June, I had the opportunity to inspect this property, Mr. Slaughter. This property is currently a city-led appeal at the municipal board for 2020. And there's been and based on the work being done at the municipal board, Mr. Slaughter and I spent about 2 hours inspecting this property at the end of July. Since that period of time, briefs were due approximately 2 weeks ago, where I made an initial recommendation that you could see below of $59,979,000. And there's been an adjustment since that period of time. I was able to do some much needed review of this property. Looking at the property description, just giving you an overview, 1725 St. James is at the old Labatt's Brewery plant on the corner of Notre Dame and Keewatin on the northeast corner of Winnipeg. Property consists of 5 different buildings, 27 different premises, and 2 stories. Actually, year built for this property, I think the property was started to get built in 1990. And since the changes, let me just double check on that. I'm just nervous here. I just want to make sure that I have it right. Because Rod and I said it was 1990, but we have the effective age for this building from 2000 to 2003. And, oh, no, correct me, I'm wrong. The first building was built in 2000.
Yes.
Since that period of time, I thought Rod and I had said 1990. The wall heights vary between 10 feet for the office portions and up to 28 feet for the warehouse portions. Zoning is M2. The land for this area is 1,129,109 square feet. And the leasable area was 472,226. And based on that information and all the work that's been done, I have a recommendation that I'd like to place forward here. Do the panel members receive and the agent have the new recommended value for this property?
I did it as rebuttal for you guys. It should be in the folder labeled item number 1, assessor rebuttal, and then assessor rebuttal P2, because he's got 2 files for it.
Jason, I don't have the password to access.
No, don't have that actually. So you know what? You're right, because we didn't get that. I actually have to print that. My apologies. Mr. Chairman, may we recess for a couple minutes while I print it for the applicant?
Or Jason, I might be able to save you some time. Merrick, if you could read the number, because I have a feeling I probably won't be able to accept.
Yeah, and that's probably true, Rod. And so just give me 1 sec here. Let me just go back into my Zoom sort of look view. Yeah, so essentially the initial value, the combined initial value was 60,875,000, and my recommended value is 57,831.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, Mr. Polik, for your diligence and attention to that, but I'm afraid I cannot accept that value on behalf of my client at this time. So
I understand that, Mr. Slaughter.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
To us to print then, or
You can send it to me after.
Okay. With that being said, what I had done initially for this property, it's a combination of the reduction. I was able to reconcile about 18,000 square feet, where our area is now 456,603, and I do believe the agent has 456,628. And I also did some adjustments to the rents for this property. And when I say that, what I had done with that is that in a lot of situations for this property, generally speaking, is that the model rents were lower than actuals in a lot of situations. But then subsequently, we had rents for one of the semi-gross properties where it was much lower than what our model rents would be. The agent had a certain number and of $6.15, and subsequently I increased that to $7, but I'll go into more detail with that later. Moving forward, so can I move forward with my actual presentation now, please?
Yes.
Okay, thank
Go
you.
ahead.
The property owner has been compliant with regards to completing the income and expense mailer information. And because the actual document was in excess of 30 pages, what I've done here is on page 2, 3, on page 2 and 3, I've made a summary of all the market rents that are on this property. The nature of the actual full 28 pages, some of it's really hard to read. And so I just included a summary here. On page 4 of my brief, I got a fun fact sheet provided by the property manager, Quadrille, with regards to one of the listings that they have here on 1680 Notre Dame. And it's just, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this building here, and just some general facts with regards to how it's a part of the St. James Business Center, and it's a multi-tenanted office warehouse building, and it's conveniently located on the corner of Notre Dame and St. James and Keewatin. Some property features that are here: easy access, great location. multifaceted building, energy efficiency. It's one of the sustainable certifications of the BOMA Best Silver Standard. And here's some details with regards to building specifications for this property that you can look at later on. Because Rod and I had spent significant time with this property in the end of July, I got some pictures on page 6 because it is a mixed use facility. It is a flex warehouse. So I got some office space on page 6, some pictures. I got a cafeteria and another office area on page 7. I got a conference area. We have some retail space on page 8. We've got some warehouse pictures on page 9 and 10. And then on page 11, there's another example of some sublease space that was being leased out on 1680 Notre Dame. Just giving an example how it's 50% office, 50% warehouse space, 24 feet clear of ceiling height, on-site parking, and the building is certified as Best Certified Silver. Some more details on the space that they have here for the unit 5 on 5,596. This area from 2022 has been occupied right now because I do believe it's on the mailer and for the next year. And just some more additional pictures on page 13 of just showing the quality of the finish of this property here. Page 14, so some additional pictures. Am I going too fast?
Nope.
Okay. And on the bottom of page 50, on page 15 shows you an overhead of the property and where it's located at. Some additional pictures on 16 and a nice overview shot of the properties showing how it intersects 3 major intersections on page 17. What is interesting for this property? This property is seen in Collier's best rates brief and best properties within the city of Winnipeg. So what happens here is the main difference between the two properties here is they're both built in the 21st century. One of them's in the first two is on 1301 Kenniston, which is the Terracon Industrial Park. And then subsequently, our building is on the bottom of page 18. And the major difference between these two properties is that for a variety of factors, most of the rents that are for the top two are in their teens, and most of the rents in our building here today are around the $10 region. On page 19 of my brief, what I have here listed here is I have a list of all the different subject property leases that are listed here. And as you can see, and the very first one here, the Rexall Canada Incorporated, the lease there started in January 1st, 2020. We had 44,659. That's our actual subject lease, but in our system, we had that at around 56,000 square feet. So this was one of the areas where, for different reasons, a mistake was made, and it has been rectified for this property appeal. The actual rent in place for this property is $8.50. Then we got some other rents from the Queen, Greenhouse Fittings, Eaton Yale Company, Tim Hortons, the Manitoba Safety Council. Manitoba Safety Council is listed as $10, but that's a semi-gross. We've actually made an adjustment for the Manitoba Safety Council, and we actually use an actual of $8.23 is what the agent was doing. So that's one of the areas where the assessment department made an adjustment to the rent. We have other properties like Polyshapes Distributing Canada, where they occupy a certain amount of square feet. I adjusted the rent for that property there. And then we got Cleverdale, Simcoe Refrigeration, and we got McKeeson Canada Corporation on the bottom here. They actually vacated the building and they've moved to Haggart, but there is a new tenant in place for that location based on my research. Moving forward from here, just for information purposes, and in terms of market rent, there's no issues. The first income stream we have is for the restaurant, for the Tim Hortons. The agent and I agree upon the rent. However, we do not agree upon the shortfall and the cap rate that we've used for this property. So but this is an overview of what the valuation process is for that. And my value hadn't changed on this property. It's at $1,085,000. Subsequently, we have two income streams for this property. We have 60T and 40S. If you look at, I know it's hard to see, but on the very first page of our documentation here, we only had the 40S portion of the property at $1,825,000. What had happened is when we entered this onto the roll, I had noticed, and Rod had confirmed this as well, is that an error was made. The actual area for this property is 20,902 square feet, and it should be all 40S. So if you look at my documentation on my recommendation, it's in the third column where it says 40S of 20,902. I don't know if everyone has that in front of them right now or can gain access to it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that shows where I adjusted the rent for the property to $823, and our overall value for that property is $2,671,000. It was at $1,825,000, but because the area had changed by about 7,000 square feet, the actual amount was adjusted accordingly. So what I have here, and we could get into great, so Rod and I could talk about this property probably for 3 hours this morning, but we're mindful of all the other appeals. So as a general overview, the information that I have here, most of it is pending upon the recommendation that I had made initially of the $59,979,000. That's been adjusted, but this is just for information that we have here. But just going over here right now, for the 60T portion, our square foot area initially was 445,457. I reduced that to 433,213. So that's a combination of some of the areas that were adjusted, and then subsequently how we added on another 8,000 square feet to the 40S portion of the building. So working at that, the value at the time was $56,000,040. And for this portion here, the value for the 60T portion in the recommendation is $54,075,000. Looking at the 40S section on page 22. Is everyone there?
Yeah. Page 22.
Yep. So if we look at the, highlighting the bottom first, initially our value was only at $1,825,000, but I've increased that. So I increased the area, and the mistake that was found was 7,388. That was added to the 40S portion of the income stream, and it was subsequently, that area was reduced on the 60T portion. So with that information going forward, the rent that we have here is a lot higher than the $8.23 that the agent had used for it. And my recommendation for this property initially was $2,853,000. That was set 2 weeks ago. And now for this portion of the building, the new value is $2,671,000.
So that's 40S, 2,671,000.
Yeah, that's my recommendation. And that'll be on the cover page of what was sent to you by
Okay.
Moving forward from that, on page 23, some of it may be a bit scuttled, but the intentions of this is pure. And what this is this is just a bit of a history of why this property is at the municipal board for 2020. During the 2020 appeal process, value was at $56,541,000. It was cut to $47,960,000. Then subsequently, there was a supplemental appeal for this property where we had to do an adjustment for the areas because initially Manitoba Safety Council was not listed as 40S. So what we had done here is, so we took this property again and we made an adjustment to the income stream to include the 40S portion of the 13,000 square feet. At that hearing at that time, they reduced it again from 47,960,000 to 44,448,000. So with that being said, it was a 27% reduction from the initial value that we had. And so, which is why we've taken it to the municipal board. So what I've done is I've researched, because buildings like this are very complicated. You're dealing with 456,000 square feet. It's very organic, it's always changing. So what I had done is I had reviewed 72% of the actual tenants and actually the rents in the building. And overall, our model was 23 cents less than the actual over 72% of the area. So that's just an overview. And what I've done here, if I showed some of the discrepancies, and since this document was created 2 months ago, I've made some additional changes to it. Say, for example, the Queen in the province of Manitoba, that rent at 881 is fine. The Manitoba Safety Building, our model was at 877. I had used 803, but then I redid my calculations after looking at Rod's brief, and I used $8.23. And there are some other examples here that I have. It's just giving a general overview of some of the work that I've done for this property to prepare for this hearing. So for my comparables for the area, what we've done is I've used mostly areas that are similar, which are flex warehouse type properties, where they range in square footage from 2,700 to 10,000 square feet. In the areas that are larger for the presentation today, my recommendations are using on the actuals for those properties there mostly. So if the question arises, how come you haven't used any larger rents? Is for the purpose of this appeal, I actually used the larger rents for most of these properties, minus one of them, which I'd explained before, where the agent used $6.15 as an actual, and I actually reduced it from $7.44 to $7 because there are actually no market rents of $6.15 in this building here, and because essentially it's a model generated value with adjustments that I've made based on all the work that I've done. Subsequently, with regards to our page 25, and my recommendation was, so 2 weeks ago, my recommendation was 59,979,000, but today it's 57,831,000. So for purposes of this appeal, we provided a cap rate study. The assessment department does tons of research with regards to market rents. The city of Winnipeg has access to all market rents within the city of Winnipeg. So when we create a value, this is what it's based on. We also do a vacancy analysis and we do a cap rate study. So this is a short summary of all the work that we've done on this property. That concludes my formal presentation, and I am open to questions.
Okay, Mr. Slaughter, questions for the assessor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start by saying that thank you, Mr. Froelich, for your attention on this file. I know that you and I have spent a lot of time over the last month and a half discussing this for the municipal board appeal. And I can tell that you've spent a lot of time since then going through what is a rather complex property. And you've probably saved us about 2.5 to 3 hours of time in questioning and discussion on leasable area. So thank you. That being said, there are some fundamental areas where we still have, I guess, a different viewpoint. And just before I move into some questions around that, Mr. Froelich, could I ask, with the new value that you've proposed, that unfortunately we can't accept, 57,831,000, what is the total rent that you're applying of all three income streams?
You know what? Ironically enough, let me just calculate it here.
Sure.
Or if anyone, so what happens here? Just give me 1 sec. Usually I'm very good at having a calculator with me. And for whatever reason, because I had so much information for this appeal, I So my blended rent for this property in total, so my gross potential was 3,728,000 or 726. 726. $8.16.
Sorry, what's the total amount though, Mr. Phil?
$8.16. So what I did is I took the gross potential income of 3,726,000 and I divided it by 456,603.
Okay, perfect. Thanks very much. So just a few questions, Mr. Chairman, then please, of Mr. Froelich. Mr. Froelich, one of the items that's applied in the income approach to value, which you have on your valuation pages for each of the three income streams, is the shortfall allowance.
Yep.
And to your understanding, the shortfall allowance is basically the recoverable expenses that are not recovered on vacant space. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Do you have any backup for the $3.85 that you're applying as the shortfall allowance?
No, due to the nature of this hearing, during the 2020 appeal period, the city of Winnipeg did an extensive amount of information that we did provide for appeal. At that appeal, we had realized we have our methodology with regards to figuring out shortfall, and the agents use another method with regards to figuring that out. And so what we had done subsequently is we have $3.85 for all industrial properties for shortfall, and shortfall is based on vacancy, and there's no issue with regards to the vacancy amount that we're using here today. And so we believe in our approach of $3.85 for shortfall is fair.
Okay, thanks. But just to confirm, you agree that it's based upon the non-recovered expenses, or sorry, the unrecovered expenses on vacant space?
Yeah, but yes.
Okay, thank you. And similar to that, kind of a subset of unrecovered expenses is another line item that you have, which is non-recovered expenses. And that's separate from the shortfall allowance. I believe that's the title you use. You just call it expenses, but those are to represent the expenses which are never contemplated to be recovered in the leases. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So as opposed to shortfall representing expenses that could be recovered but aren't recovered because somebody's not in that space to pay it, these are the expenses that the owner can never recover. And my next question, Mr. Froelich, is, again, does the city have any backup for the allowance that you've applied, which is 3% of the effective gross income? Do you have any backup for that number?
Due to the nature of the board revision hearing, where time is a priority and getting information done, this appeal process is to look at the property only. Our process is our modeling process, which is very extensive, and we do not provide that information at a board revision hearing.
Okay, thanks very much. And my last couple of questions, Mr. Froelich, are around the capitalization rate. That's the third item where I guess we don't quite see eye to eye. You've applied a 5.6% capitalization rate to the majority of the property minus the standalone restaurant. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. And the only evidence that I see in your presentation around capitalization rates is on page 26, where you have the a summary of the broker marketing reports for various types of properties. Is that correct?
That's correct.
The capitalization rates, I should say.
Yep.
Yeah. And the brokers appear to break the industrial asset class, and typically they only look at better quality assets in their marketing studies, but they break it into class A and B. The subject property is over 20 years old. Would you agree?
Yes.
So it's a subjective discussion on whether this be considered an A or B. But let's say hypothetically we agreed that this would fall in the category of a class A. Would you agree that this would be considered at the upper end of the class A due to the fact that it is over 20 years old?
I would consider it to be definitely at the upper end of the class A, and Colliers in their information package also feel the same way.
Yeah, so on page 26, your summary of the brokers' cap rates in their marketing reports shows a range, and I'll mention the three brokers and their range for Class A.
Yep.
Or actually, I'll just mention the upper end because I think we're agreeing that this would be on the upper end because of its age. So Colliers is stating the upper end of the range is 6.75%. Would you agree?
The upper range, that is what Collier's saying, but
Yeah, and CBRE is 6.5, so a little lower. Yeah, and Cushman and Wakefield is 6.5.
correct.
So my question, Mr. Froelich, is do you think 5.6% is a bit aggressive for the subject property for the 2023 assessment?
No, because when I look at this type of property, the 5.6% is I'm assuming at the 21st percentile within the city of Winnipeg database for industrial properties. So what we're looking at here is our range for multi-tenanted. Well, see, so we have single tenant A, industrial A, multi-tenanted B, and then we have industrial A and industrial B. So if we agree upon the fact that this property is an industrial A property, because there are a few like it within the city of Winnipeg, and we know, generally speaking, this property wasn't built in the 1970s. So this was built in the 21st century. It is a nice property. The pictures indicate that it is a nice property. And so subsequently, within the city of Winnipeg percentage, the 5.6 that we're using would be in the 21st percentile. So I think we're being fair and reasonable in our approach to the cap rate for this property.
And this range that you show for A and B, and it's a blanket range of 5.55 to 7.45%, doesn't matter if it's A or B. Do you have anything in evidence to show any of those cap rates?
I have some rebuttal evidence that I will provide after you present your rebuttal information.
Okay, fair enough. And you and I inspected the property on, let's just say early August 2022. And you recall that as we were going through the different buildings, the site manager had mentioned specifically to us, this property is showing its age. We have many problems that we have to rectify or remediate because of its age. You remember that direct?
You know what, Rod? It was a long, hot day in August. I was sweating buckets. I don't remember every aspect of the conversation.
Okay. Fair enough. Thank you, Mr. Froelich. I think that's all my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Richard, any questions?
Just to follow that then, so I understand the cap rate used as a model cap rate, you did not adjust it in any fashion.
This is a model based on all the research that we had for properties for the cap rate study we did to create the 2023 reassessment cycle for this property.
Thank you very much. That's all.
Okay, Gail, any questions?
I have two questions, just in regards to your recommendation as to the values. The 40S is 2671, right?
Yeah, $2,671,000.
Yeah, and for the 60T?
It's $54,075,000.
And that totals?
Those two totals there, let me get my calculator back out.
Like they don't total the 57 when I add them up.
No, because you also got to factor in the 40S portion.
Okay.
So if you add the 40S portion of it, let me just get my calculator.
Which is the
Manitoba Safety Council, where their class and liability is a bit different.
Okay, so why is the Manitoba Safety Council classified differently?
Because it's quantified as being a learning center, a center of learning where they actually establish, they have courses and they have course loads to teach safety within the province of Manitoba. So under the Manitoba, the MAA, they're liable to pay less. They're exempt from school taxes. So all the other areas for this property are fully taxable, but the Manitoba Safety Council is listed at 40S, which means that they do not pay school taxes for their space.
Okay, so that's been historical, right? Like that was previously there, right? Or is there another tenant as well that is school tax exempt?
That's the only one for this building.
Okay.
But in different buildings within the city of Winnipeg, there are portions of it, like the one on, I do believe with regards to other properties, there are 40S portions of it where we've made the adjustments accordingly.
Yeah, I understand that. Okay, thank you. That's
You're
all my
welcome.
questions.
All right, and I have no questions that haven't been asked and answered. So Mr. Slyer, now you can begin your presentation.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if I could ask you to turn, there's 3 documents that we submitted in evidence. 2 pertain to all properties, capitalization rate study and unrecovered expense study. And then we have the direct evidence for 1725 St. James. So if I could ask you to turn to that document, we now are in agreement, Mr. Chairman, on one of the greatest areas of contention that we had, which was the leasable area. And I guess just to summarize it, the owner has consistently stated the leasable area to be what it is, 456,000. The city had some different opinion, I think, that stemmed from gross area. But anyway, as Mr. Froelich had mentioned, he's gone through, he spent a lot of time, and we've finally come to a resolution on that item. So that's fantastic. So I'm going to skip a lot of the preamble, I guess, in the evidence. But we do have a description, Mr. Froelich had gone through it, of the 5 buildings on the site, and you can see an overhead map on page 6, which kind of gives you a sense of where the properties are situated. And just for your reference, it may help as we go through some of the, if you have a question in your mind about some of the units like the Manitoba Safety Council. The building that stretches across the north is 1680 Notre Dame, that's facing Notre Dame. And that building is, I guess, considered to be the highest degree of finish on average for the tenancies. In that building, we used to have the Warehouse 1 head office, and there was a retail component. They vacated. We have the Manitoba Safety Council, which is more of a finished space. We have one type of paint retailer. So it's kind of the showcase building, let's say. But I don't think we need to get into a discussion on what is the appropriate rents for each of the buildings, because we're now in agreement on both the leasable area, and we're very close on the total market rent being applied. So while we may have discrepancies in certain units, the overall is pretty close. But just for your reference on what the buildings are, if we move clockwise around, the building on the east side, again facing Notre Dame, is 1650 Notre Dame. And this building now, like the other 2, is more of a warehouse with your standard office finish at the front. And with standard office finish having a 10-foot ceiling height, you often will have space above that could be finished as additional office, or it may just be storage. And that's where there is the difference between a gross area and a leasable area, because the market often does not apply additional value or consider it leasable when there's space above the office, unless it's finished. So we have about 2/3 of that mezzanine space being considered part of the leasable area, and just under 1/3 that isn't. And that was, I think, the beginning of the discrepancy in the area conversation. So the next building, the one in the middle, is 1725 St. James, very similar to 1650 Notre Dame. It's mostly warehouse, multi-tenant with some small office. The last building, the one that's facing St. James, is 1715 St. James. It's 100% occupied by the province of Manitoba. This is a storage warehouse, basically, where a lot of the PP&E was stored during the pandemic. They have some office areas again at the front and some space above, but predominantly warehouse. The last building is the Tim Hortons, which is kind of at the southeast corner. It's a standalone restaurant. Altogether, the land to building ratio with all these buildings is 2.75 to 1, which is sufficient for this type of and size of property, in our opinion. The predominant approach to value that we both parties agree to is the income approach. On page 11, we begin our income approach analysis. And we work through our analysis of the actual rents in place. And when we do this analysis, we are still doing what's called a fee simple analysis, which is we want to make sure it's at market. It's really a market rent analysis. But our conclusion is typically that unless there's any reason to believe otherwise, the actual rents in place are probably the best indicator of market for that space. You know, unless it's a very old lease or a non-arm's length lease, or there's some other factor that makes you believe that it's not indicative. So our analysis of the actual rents is shown on page 11. Page 12 is the actual rents for the school tax exempt tenant. And then at the bottom of page 12 is a market rent, which the city and Altus agree to for the Tim Hortons standalone building. And you may notice that that rent is higher than the actual. And that is because the actual is a pad lease only. So in a fee simple analysis, we can't just take the income in place. We have to value everything, land and building. And so a market rent is applied to account for the building on the land. And we're in agreement with that. So, so far, both parties are in agreement, basically. The vacancy allowance is the first of the adjustments we make in the income approach to that potential income. And the market vacancy allowance applied by the city to industrial properties for April 2021, our reference date, is 7%. The actual year-end vacancy at 2020 was 9%, but it's not a consistent high vacancy. There has been times when it's been lower and times when it creeps up again. There is a vacancy issue approaching with this property. But overall, we feel that the 7% is appropriate. The next item that we look at is the shortfall or the expenses that are not recovered over the holding period of the property because of vacant space. This is the first discrepancy that we have. The city applies a blanket rate of $3.85 a square foot for industrial properties. And to be fair, we've analyzed that rate and we feel that for the most part, about 90% of the time, that's pretty bang on. Because what this is looking at is the taxes and the utilities and the recoverable expenses like snow clearing, waste removal, basic repair and maintenance. That's pretty close. But recall, this property has a higher degree of finished space in some of the buildings. And with that will come a higher expense. Your taxes are higher. Oftentimes your tenant requirements are higher so that your snow clearing and waste removal, etc. Utilities, of course, because you have HVAC, more HVAC. The city had mentioned in their brief a marketing brochure on page 5. And you can see clearly on page 5, they list the additional rent in 2021, and it actually is I think that says $533 a square foot. So it's far in excess, it's in excess of the $385 that the city's applying. And that's corroborated by the actual expenses in the property that you'll find on the rent roll. They're actually $4.44 in 2020, or sorry, $5.44 a square foot. So in a case like this, we feel it's appropriate to venture from the blanket rate and look to what is more realistic for the property. Something north of $5 a square foot. We have applied $5 a square foot. So that is the shortfall allowance that is being applied in our income analysis for the industrial portion. The next item of erosion to the potential income when we're doing an income approach valuation is the non-recovered expenses. We touched upon this in the questioning, but these are the expenses that an owner has to incur generally on an annual basis that they can't recover from any tenant. These are real expenses. They should not be ignored. They include, and what I'd like to do is in a moment, refer to our supplementary submission on non-recovered expenses. This is a discussion we've had many times, so I'll keep it brief, but what I'll show you in this presentation is that what these non-recovered expenses include are starting with space marketing costs. So anytime an owner has to market for vacant space, there's leasing commissions, there could be tenant improvement costs, advertising costs. There's all sorts of costs that they can't put into the leases to say to the other tenants, we'd like you to pay for your share of this. It has nothing to do with them. It's a non-recovered expense. And that's a large item. We also have professional fees. Oftentimes, many professional fees will not be shared amongst the other tenants. It's the owner's cost. We have asset management fees in some cases. That's their responsibility, but it's necessary for the proper management of the property. And then we have structural reserve. And what that is a separate bucket from repair and maintenance, which is an annual amount that is spent on the property. And it's separate, it's kind of a subset of the capital improvements for the property, which we shouldn't be considering in an income valuation. And what this simply is a reserve, just like with a condo. You'll have a reserve that the occupants need to keep for the rainy day fund, for when things go wrong. And that's an appropriate and valid expense or reserve that the market considers when they're looking at the income potential for a property. So if I could draw your attention, please, to this additional document, Altus Group Limited non-recovered expenses.
The item 00 for applying for items 1, 3, 4, and 7.
Rod, what page are you on right now?
I'll be going to page 1, Merrick, of the non-recovered expense.
Okay, thank you, Rod.
Okay, so I'll just pause until everybody's comfortable
Yep.
with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just give a bit of history. I almost heard this many times, but historically, year after year, assessment cycle after assessment cycle, the city had applied a non-recovered expense allowance of 7%. It was broken into 2 categories: 5% for what was called non-recovered management allowance. All of the items I discussed except for capital reserve or structural reserve, and the other was 2% for other, which we consider to be structural reserve. Always 7%. For the 2020 assessment cycle, that dropped from 7 to 2. And we were here many times discussing this. For the 2023 cycle, the city has conceded a bit, I guess, and they've raised it to 3%, but we're still suggesting that this is not sufficient. So if we go back in time on page 1, this is a quote of what this allowance constituted, the first portion of it, 5%. It was a non-recoverable operating expense, bang on. They called it management. That was just a shortened term. Even with net leases and competent management, there still will be expenses incurred by the landlord that are non-recoverable from the tenants. Perfect. They say examples of these are processing payments and chasing bad debts. Well, that's just a small part. We're on the same page. We both recognize that this exists. They quote that in the 2002 general assessment and further. And then that language kind of got shortened to management. And eventually in 2020, the city said, well, wait a minute, management's recovered. It's a recoverable expense. We said, yes, but that's not what this was referring to. And so I'd like to draw your attention to page 3. Now we go into appraisal text, try and get to the actual theory behind these items. So case studies and appraisal 1 from the Sauder School of Business, Real Estate Division, has this quote regarding non-recovered expenses. The appraiser should also account for non-recovered expenses, also called non-rechargeable expenses. The most important non-recoverable cost items to be aware of: space marketing costs, which include both tenant inducements and leasing costs, and an allowance for structural or mechanical repairs. So again, the appraisal texts are now reminding us we cannot ignore these items. We look to, on page 4, this is from a separate course that I took through the UBC on office property valuation. And it applies to all income producing properties, but they are very specific. I thought this was a great quote because they're very clear about these items, recoverables and non-recoverables. Operating costs and property taxes. This is the quote on page 4 from office property valuation text, UBC. Operating costs include such items as payroll, cleaning, utilities, maintenance, repairs, grounds and parking area maintenance, management fees, and insurance. So these are all the items that we talked about in the shortfall allowance. These are the things that you can recover from a tenant. And a shortfall is when the tenant's not there to recover them. What are non-recovered, they call leasing and capital costs, non-recovered expenses. The appraiser should also account for non-recoverable expenses. This is the same language as in the general appraisal text. The most important non-recoverable cost items to be aware of are space marketing costs, which include both tenant inducements and leasing costs, and allowance for structural or mechanical repairs. So we have it again specified by the appraisal education courses. Now we look to other assessment bodies across Canada. And I don't like to do this because everything is apples to oranges in different jurisdictions. But this is a fundamental theory in appraisal. So, what do other people do? SAMIT, that's the Saskatchewan assessment. On page 5, we have excerpts from their manual on assessment. And they specify that there are non-recoverable expenses. And on page 6, they go through what those items are. Legal and audit fees, professional fees, structural reserves and repairs, which are capital in nature, advertising and promotion, and leasing commissions. They're very specific. And they include all of these in their valuation. I believe they use 7% as the expense ratio. On page 7, MPAC is the Ontario Assessing Authority. On page 7, near the bottom of the page is a quote from their assessment guide. However, even with triple net leases, there are expenses associated with operating buildings that are not necessarily passed through to the tenant, but rather absorbed by the owner. These expenses, referred to as non-recoverable expenses, may include such items as marketing costs, large capital cost projects, legal and auditing fees, and ongoing expenses. So appraisal theory suggests that it exists. The market, we know it exists. They're real. Appraisal theory says we have to recognize it. Assessing authorities recognize it. The Manitoba or the Winnipeg, City of Winnipeg Assessing Authority had recognized them. They've now reduced them considerably to what we believe to be insufficient. And why do we say that? Because on page 10, we've done an extensive study on this item. Well, we say it because it had always been 7%, which was deemed appropriate by all parties, and now it's been reduced. So the flag is raised, but we've gone one step further and looked at 30 different properties, industrial properties, properties in general. It's a mixture. Probably about a third to a half industrial properties. And you'll see 2 columns on the far side of page 10. One is the percentage of the effective gross income that we calculate of these expenses in on a 3-year average, not including tenant improvements. And you go down that page and you'll see that the average is 6.64%. It's pretty bang on to the 7% that we're asking. But if we include tenant inducements, which is a very touchy subject, but I mean, the appraisal texts have suggested that we can't ignore them. And I know as an appraiser that if you're doing a discounted cash flow, you don't ignore them. These are real expenses. If we include those, that average increases to 10.66%. But we are satisfied so long as what had been historically applied continues to be applied. With combined management non-recovered and structural reserve of 7%. I will point out, and I'll be drawing your attention to this later, but I'll just mention it now, that in the aforementioned Board of Revision decisions for the 2020 assessment, there's 2. There's the original and then there's a supplementary. In both cases, you will see the board orders, and in both cases, the board agreed to our submission that the 5% management non-recovered allowance be applied in addition to the 2%. So the sum total is 7. So this has now been established as well by the Board of Revision for the 2020 assessment.
I will caution against using past board orders. We don't know what evidence was presented at those hearings, and certainly we can know from firsthand experience the board decisions on properties have been all over the place.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'd just like to put a pin in that subject for the moment. We feel very strongly about this expense item to be consistently at 7%. And I'd like to move on now to the capitalization rate. Just before I go to that, there is one other income item that we've added into our valuation, and that's parking income of $8,000. We've added that in addition to what the city would apply. So once we get to the bottom NOI, we now have to determine what the capitalization rate is for this. And I'm not going to go through the preamble. We have a separate study here on capitalization rates. And maybe I'll just ask that the panel members and Mr. Assessor could turn to that document. But I'll just speak very quickly about this item. I know that we've talked about capitalization rates many times with members of the board, so I don't need to go through the theory of capitalization rate. But let's just keep in mind a fundamental fact about what capitalization rate is. When you're purchasing a property and you've done your due diligence on what the appropriate net operating income should be, which we think we've done, you apply a rate of return that you expect on that income. And what's going to influence that rate of return are a few items, but a big one is that feeling in your stomach. How confident am I that that net operating income is going to sustain or potentially grow? If it grows, this feeling in my stomach eases, my capitalization rate comes down. But if I look at that property and I think it's 23 years old, you know, you can call it an A, you can call it whatever you want. It's 23 years old. I'm going to be spending more and more capital improvements. Stomach tightens. I see vacancy concerns coming in some of the tenants, which we're not recognizing in our NOI. Bit of tension. And if I was to say that I'm going to ignore or reduce those non-recovered expenses in my analysis, I'm just going to apply 3% because I feel optimistic. Tension in the stomach, because we're going to experience those expenses. So the point is, if the board decides to accept the city's non-recovered expense allowance of 3%, please understand that that is the equivalent of 40 basis points on the capitalization rate. So the capitalization rates we're going to show you from our study and from the broker study, and they're actually corroborated by the assessor's evidence, in our opinion, should be increased 40 basis points if you do not agree with the increased non-recovered expense ratio. So capitalization rates, if I could ask you to turn to that presentation. There's a section in our study that talks about vacancy, and I'm not going to go into that because it's kind of a subset of the discussion around vacancy, which we agree with, but I will mention one thing. There's been a lot of development of industrial, a lot, especially within the capital region. And this is increasing supply, which increases competition. So the comment that the assessor made that this is one of very few properties, I have a disagreement with. I think this is one of the old guard of this type of property where there's a lot of the new guard being built in Centerport, in Inksbrook, St. Boniface, in the south part of the city. We see a lot of supply coming on stream, a lot of new supply, a lot of the type of supply that investors and tenants are looking for. That's increasing the competition. Again, that increases the unease, I would argue, for an investor of a property that's 23 years old. So we'll go through, there's a lot of information on the vacancy. We'll get right to the point on page. I apologize, I don't think we have our pages numbered in our cap rate study. If you, Mr. Chairman, if you go forward in the presentation, you'll come, I think, about 6-7 pages in to a page that says Winnipeg capitalization rates, and there's a summary at the bottom. And these are the capitalization rates that we had examined last cycle. So based on the April 18 value. And it was just a subset. It's the ones that we were able to look at. And they basically, at that time, corroborated what the brokers were saying, which is that cap rates, for the most part, for investment grade category industrial, was somewhere between 6 or 6.25 to just under 8%. And if you had that kind of non-investment grade, or what we call C-class industrial, which this is not, then you could see cap rates go above 8%. And on the subsequent page, we have a similar graph, which shows another 5 properties and a second conclusion. And this is our analysis of sales which occurred since that reference date, so leading up to the April 21 date. And the brokers have, in their studies, and you recall that we had an upper range that was around 6.5 to 6.75. We talked about that from the city's evidence. But what you'd find is, from looking at the cap rates last cycle to this cycle, April 18 to April 21, there was a slight compression for industrial cap rates. It almost goes against reason, because the real difference between April 18 and April 21 is we're in a pandemic. And so volume of activity has slowed, everything has slowed. But one of the other factors of capitalization rate is the cost of money, and the net effect of everything, and basically retail changing because of e-commerce and the demand for more industrial space in close proximity or in centers, increased demand for industrial. And we saw a slight compression despite all other factors from in the capitalization rate. So the range now, rather than be a 6.25% as the floor for Class A, we go as low as 6%. The brokers do. Brokers do as well. And in our examination of what we could look at for capitalization rates, because there wasn't a heck of a lot of activity, but I won't go through the detail on each one, but basically it supports or corroborates what the brokers are saying. That the low end, the best class, the Inksbrook, the Centerpoint, whatever the best is that's new, would be at about 6%. If you're 23 years old, you'd be somewhere north of that. And then if it's Class B, you'd be 6.5 to 7.5 in the non-investment grade. We haven't seen any change in the market, hasn't really changed their opinion. So we feel that the 5.6% cap rate is far too low for the subject property. I know, Mr. Chairman, we don't want to talk about what happened last time at the board, but it's a 90% compression from what the board implied last time. And that is just not seen in the market. It's unrealistic. So we have a range that we feel would be appropriate from 6% to 6.5%. I'd now like to go back, Mr. Chairman, to the main submission, please.
Okay.
Okay. On page 14 is basically a summary of what I was just discussing from our cap rate study. And the conclusions, again, corroborated by both the broker studies and the city's evidence that is in place today, is that the floor would be 6% for the best quality Class A. Subject property would not be in that position. It would be at the upper end, but I admit Class A. So that would put us at around 6.5. But what we've applied today is 6.25%. But the thing I'd like to remind the board of is that we have included the 7% non-recovered. So if the board were to say, no, we don't agree with the 7%, well, then I would suggest that we should be at the 6.5% cap rate, because we're taking that risk and we're now putting it in the rate of return. So on page 16, we conclude our presentation. At the time of preparing this, we thought there was a contention in area and rent, so it's in blue, but now we don't have any contention. We're actually a bit higher on our income. We're at 3,797,000. I think Mr. Froelich mentioned the city's at 3,726,000. So we have a higher income. We agree on the vacancy allowances. We asked the board to consider the non-recovered expense of 7% rather than 3%. We asked the board to consider the shortfall rate based closer on the actual recoverable expenses. We're using slightly lower at $5 a square foot. We have no contention on the restaurant. And then the last contention is the cap rate. We asked the board to increase the capitalization rate from 5.6% to 6.25%. And the result of that for the three income streams, Mr. Chairman, is we have a revised value of $50,125,000. In the appendix are photographs of property, building descriptions, the city's income approach valuation, original income approach valuation, the income expense mailers, which goes through all of the income and the rents in place. But I don't know if we need to discuss that, and the previous board orders from 2020. And that concludes our presentation, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Froelich, questions?
Yes. In terms of comparable properties, why would Colliers put this property in their information brochure as an industrial A?
Number one, Mr. Froelich, that page that you cited in your brief, sorry, can you direct me to the page where you have that in your evidence? Oh, here it is, page 18. If I understand correctly, this is coming from a Colliers tax agent presentation to the Board of Revision, is it not?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, I can't speak to Colliers tax agent's opinion on what they consider to be the best properties in the city.
Okay.
So I have nothing to say about that.
So would you say that the rents for this property that were for a building built in 2000 are the rents used is an accurate reflection of market rents that are currently used for this property?
You're asking if the actual rents in place are indicative of market?
Yep.
Yes, I agree with that.
So would you confirm that $6.15 for flex warehouse space that was built in 2000 is indicative of the marketplace?
100%. That's the rent that the parties agreed to. That's actually what that is the net result of a semi-gross lease. The province typically has their leases on a semi-gross basis where they don't recover all of the expenses. And you can actually see on the rent roll in evidence for Her Majesty the Queen, 1715 St. James, their recoveries are, I think, $352 a square foot as opposed to the $544. And that's consistent. The province typically doesn't recover all their expenses. So what we have to do when valuing the property is make sure that we deduct the difference from the face rent to determine the net. So the face rent of $795, when we deduct the non-recovered expenses, unrecovered expenses, becomes $6.15 a square foot. So does that make sense in the market, Mr. Froelich? It does. This is almost 100,000 square feet. This is the entire building that they lease, 1715 St. James. So every other building is broken up into smaller units. This is the entire building. You and I were in that building. It's predominantly a warehouse for storage with some office finish. It's actually completely in line with what we would typically feel is appropriate for 100,000 square feet of industrial space at this age.
So with that being said, and just to confirm, the province of Manitoba is actually leasing out other space within this complex?
Yes, they subsequently, because of the pandemic, they needed more space.
Okay.
And the owner had a great deal of vacant space at 1680 Notre Dame that they couldn't fill. Another risk that I think would be something I would be looking at if investing in this property.
So
So they came to a deal that the province would take that space on a temporary basis, just simply to get through the pandemic. And I think that lease comes up very shortly, if I understand from when we were there. It's just they're throwing storage in there.
So we are, okay. So the province does rent out 63,874 square feet in this building as well, in addition to the $6.15 rent that you're using, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And what's the lease in place? What's the net lease in place for that property?
That would be in both of our presentations and our income workup.
Yep.
And that unit is number 1 at 1680 Notre Dame. It's a smaller space, 63,874. This is the space that was warehouse 1, so it's more of a finished space. Actually, it was part retail. And they're paying rent, which again, when we make the same deductions down, comes to $8.81 a square foot on an annual basis. But I think, Mr. Froelich, what you're going to suggest is this is indicative of market more than the other. This is a short-term motivated lease. The province needed the space. The owner said, okay, we've got basically retail office space. You can have it for this price. And on an annual basis, they're going to want more than they would get on a 5 or 10-year lease.
So the business decision, is that an indication of what an actual market rent should be? Because from my perspective, he made a business decision to occupy that space, but based on all the other rents that are for the other 26 premises that we have in this location, we don't have one rent at $6.15. So is that a market rent or a business decision rent?
Well, every one of these rents that we're discussing today are the meeting of minds between a tenant and the owner for space that differs. And the lower rent is for the largest space, which is basically warehouse. And this rent that you're discussing now is for also large space, but smaller, that was more of a finished space. So it completely makes sense that the meeting, and again, there's going to be a motivation that the owner will want more for that space if the tenant is only willing to take it on a part-time or a temporary basis for 1 year. That's typically a factor which will increase the market rent in the negotiation.
Okay, so on page 39 of your brief and 41 on your brief, there's adjusted recoveries and then there's total management fee. So do you see the recovery fee of $54,490?
Sorry, which page are we on?
Page 39. Page 39 of your evidence.
And what's the line item?
Line item is administration recoveries.
Okay, management fee installments and accrual.
Yeah, just give me 1 sec here. I wrote it down as a question and I just want to reference it here right now. So the line item is, I think it's 44599,999. It's just above the property taxes.
Yeah, management fee, installments, management fee accrual.
Okay, 54,490, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then on the next page, just bear with me here on page. Page 41. Oh, yeah, on page 41 near the bottom, it says total management fees of 40,409.
Yes.
Okay, so they actually made $14,000 in shortfall on this transaction, on this line item, would it not be?
Well, I wouldn't say that, Mr. Froelich. I think I'd want to understand exactly what the recoverable is constituting as far as line items from the expenses. There could be other administration costs
I
that they.
understand, but it's just the trend that I've noticed here, because usually management fees per se are fully recoverable. And here in a situation, they actually got more than anticipated. So I wanted to highlight that to the board.
Yeah, well, I don't think that's a fair statement, Mr. Froelich, until we understand what is considered recoverable in the management item. Again, you might have, and if you give me a minute, we'll probably find administration expenses, which are also part of, you know, we have other management fees that are listed here as recoverables as well.
Yeah.
So we have non-recovered management fees and we have recoverable management fees of 57,000. So it's bang on, which surprises me because there's vacancy in the property.
Yeah.
But anyway, that exercise I'd be very cautious about, because we don't know what the owner is including in different line items.
Yeah, and believe me, I understand where we're coming from, but the city of Winnipeg's position is that most management fees are recoverable, and a lot of the areas that you're looking in terms of commissions, leasing commissions and whatnot, those have been excluded at the next level court within the municipal board level, and there's been decisions upon that as well. So that's why, with regards to the methodology.
So I don't know how to approach this because this is questioning, and that wasn't really a question, but I would love to talk about that item if possible, if it would be a rebuttal.
Okay, but
I'm just trying to be mindful of time here as well, right? Because I have no other questions other than that. So,
Mr. Chairman, if I can just summarize that by stating that I tried to make clear in our presentation about non-recovereds that it isn't management. Management is a recoverable expense. The city just calls these non-recovered expenses management, as short for management non-recovered expenses. So we need to differentiate. Management is a recoverable. What we're talking about is the non-recoverable management related expenses: space marketing costs, professional fees, asset management costs, structural reserve, etc.
Okay, Mr. Froelich, then I take it you finished your question?
because I want to be mindful of time.
Okay, Richard, any questions?
I have none, thank you.
Okay, Gail, any questions?
Just a couple of questions in regards to the tenancy and the expansion of lease space. You mentioned Manitoba government, they've taken on more lease space, so they're part of the 60T, right?
Yes, they are.
Okay, and then the Manitoba Safety Council, their space is increased as well, right?
Yes, they expanded in building 1680, and they're the tenant that has been considered a seminary of learning, which by legislation.
Right. So that just expanded as well.
Yeah.
Their space. Okay. Yeah. Just so I have that clear in my head. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, now, Mr. Flick, you have a second item of rebuttal?
Well, so in rebuttaling the information that the agent has provided us today, I do have rebuttal information that I'd like to discuss.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, is there a paper copy of that rebuttal?
If we can recess, I can get you that. I did email you a digital version, but I don't, if you don't have access.
Yeah, I don't have access.
Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
let's take a 2-minute recess to print.
Yeah, actually, just you want to make it 5 minutes because I do have to go to the washroom.
Okay, yeah, we'll take a 5-minute break. Let's reconvene and get on with Mr. Froelich's rebuttal. So, Mr. Froelich, your rebuttal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. When we looked at the Altus cap rate study, we saw some inconsistencies with regards to the valuation process they use for the cap rate study and the valuation process that's used when they come to appeal setting. So in our perspective is market value is market value, and parameters shouldn't change. And so if we change or manipulate parameters, it ends up in different results. And so what I've done here with regards to my presentation on rebuttals, I got 3 of them that I'll quickly go over. But the middle one, ironically, is not enough, is the same cap rate that we've had. So, but I'll discuss that further. First property we're looking at is on page 2 of my brief on 110 Sutherland. During the 2020 appeal cycle, many agents stated that we could not do a cap rate on an owner-occupied vacant building. Altus has completed one on their list. So if you look at Altus's list of cap rate study, on their second cap rate on 110 Sutherland, they actually have included that in their study. But at the time of sale, it was vacated and it was owner occupied. So showing the information here, because we want to be consistent. And so I felt when we did the cap rate study on one of our properties last time, we were being fair. Agents disagreed with that at the time. And then subsequently in the next cycle, they are doing that. So I just want to share that information. So when you're looking at the mailers, you can't see that the previous owner on 110 Sutherland, it was owner occupied. And subsequently it's owned by Greyhound Canada at the time. So then on the page, unfortunately, I don't have them numbered, but on top it has 215 income and expense mailer, property showing that it's owner fully occupied on the top portion and also on the bottom portion. Next page is on 110 Sutherland. This is the cover copy of the brief that they had presented for a 2022 realty appeal, which was on October 26, 2021. So at the time, the value of this property was, our assessed value was $2,245,000. They requested $1,949,000. And what's important consideration is this is the brief that I had provided to us at the hearing to justify their position for the appeal on 2022. The reference date was April 1st, 2018. So on the next page here, one of the questions I ask is why would Altus use a much higher rent, lower vacancy and cap rate for a cap rate study? And in this situation, the city had used $4.81, a 6% vacancy and a 7.8% cap rate. For a vacancy of, for the cap rate, they used $5.50, a higher rent and a 4% vacancy. Changing the inputs change how the cap rates can be created. There was a sale for this property. The sale was for $2.5 billion, and the sale for that property was on, and they're using it here right now at the time because we're always mindful of valuation purposes, right? And so for this period, for the 2023 cycle, the value was $2.5 billion, and our assessment was $2,245,000. So what we notice here is that different reference years, but there's a huge discrepancy on what's being used and what's not being used, right? And so what has happened here is that for the cap rate study they've used $5.50. Meanwhile, changing our market rent by 70 cents would be significant. Our vacancy was 6%. Reducing the vacancy will impact cap rate. So when we're looking at this, when they created the cap rate of 7.93%, it's significantly higher, or it's actually, that's what they've used here for their cap rate. Meanwhile, for the border revision presentation, Altus used this 7.93. So they were consistent with regard to the cap rate that they had used. Yeah. Okay. So what I've done here is the parameters that we've used on page. What I'm looking at is I have the City of Winnipeg parameters in 110 Sutherland and the 2020 Altus cap rate that they had used. So you notice the differences between the market rents of $481 to $550, and you'll notice the difference with regards to the valuation process of the sale. So we don't include management in that, right? Altus does. Our net operating income's 175. They're at 198, right? Our cap rate that we used for the sale was 7%. They're using 7.93%. So going through this exercise, it's interesting how data can be manipulated to create a value to justify a position. It's just like during the past 3 years, we've had municipal board appeals where agents don't believe that there's any value in having excess land added on to the value of the property. Our position is that excess land does add value to the property. And at hearings, they don't include excess land in some situations. At municipal board hearings, they do that because it affects the cap rate. So that's an important consideration that we have here. And I wanted to show the difference between the valuation process used at appeals and the valuation process used on cap rates. For 58 Hutchings, what's interesting here is that the cap rate used by Altus is at 6.5%. Ours is within a quarter of a point. So with that being said, we have no issues with the cap rate for Inkster Industrial at 6.5%. But what we have here is you got a 6.5% property that is 11 years older than the subject property. And so with that being said, we feel that our property's newer, more modern. Our cap rate of 5.6% is justified in that position. So we had no issues with regards to the cap rate study done on 58 Hutchings, which is more indicative of the cap rates used by Altus for the 2018 cycle. Another aspect that I want for everyone to be mindful of is what happened in retail and office properties is very different than what has happened for industrial properties. Industrial properties did not suffer the same sort of economic conditions that hotels, retail, and office also had gone through. Next thing that's interesting is 700 Mission. The reason why I'm familiar with 700 Mission, it's an old industrial property built in the 1970s, which is...
sorry, Mr. Chairman, is this part of the rebuttal evidence?
Is it in there?
In fairness, it's not. But in fairness, what's important to realize here is that the cap rate used for the sale is 6.1%.
Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
If it's not in the rebuttal, then we.
You know what? In fairness, you are 100% correct. I apologize for this. I had this property on case management recently, and I just thought for educational purposes is that in this circumstance here's an old building built in 1970s, and this cap rate 6.1%.
Mr. Chairman.
I understand completely. Okay, moving forward, we are looking at the 2020 real estate market lookout.
Okay.
I have a better copy here. So just stating here on the next page from the CB Richard Ellis portion of it, it just talks about rising industrial rents, improving feasibility of new construction. So what's interesting about this trend that Rod had referenced is that buildings are changing. And a great example of that is that the inventory is moving from the older stock to the newer stock, and there is some stock moving to the outside of Winnipeg. And even a great example of this is one of the properties that Rod had mentioned at Haggard. So what has happened here is on the Haggard property, McKeeson used to occupy a significant amount of space within the subject property. And what has happened now is they've moved, they expanded their space, they've gone to a newer building here. And in that situation, they're no longer paying $9 rent. They're paying a $14 net rent for a brand new building here. So newer buildings do have higher rents. And so it's the markets are adjusting. And historically, and what has happened here is the vacancy rate that we've used for the St. James is 7%, which is a lot more than in other areas within the city of Winnipeg. But to say that the cap rates aren't compressing as much for industrial properties as the agent is stating, I would disagree with that. And we have the market evidence to sort of prove that. So what has happened here is, just as an overview, we're just showing the industrial rates with regards to what's taking place here. Industrial cap rates, which is done by CB Richard Ellis. For industrial A type properties, their range is 5.25% to 6.5%. And so when we're looking at where our cap rate is for this type of property, there aren't a lot of properties that are like this right now. We're using 5.6, which is higher than what the industrial A that's used by CB Richard Ellis. And you can see that on this page here.
So the page are you on, Mr. Brewer?
You know what? This is the summary page for the cap rate, and I do apologize for not numbering this.
Okay.
That's my error. And then on the next page for CB Richard Ellis, they have industrial A, and they're using 5 and a quarter.
Sorry, where do you see 5 1/4?
Where it says Winnipeg investment trends.
Okay, because I see. Oh, I see. There's a page, the second page shows 5.75. Oh, no, this is 04. This is post-reference, Mr. Foley. This is Q4 221. On page, the page you're referencing, I'd like to ask the chairman to ignore that, please.
Mr. Slaughter, if you look at the next page where it says Winnipeg industrial trends.
Yeah, Mr. Froelich, the page that you're referring to here, Winnipeg investment trends with the 5.25 cap rate as the base, this is the lowest.
The next page
so
over.
Q4 21.
And you know, I acknowledge that, Mr. Slaughter. But the next page over shows industrial A at 5.75.
Right. So for the sake of the board, can we just agree that what you're saying is the lowest cap rate according to CBRE, the lowest of all the broker cap rates, is 5.75, not 5.25?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Next page, talking about industrial, second paragraph. Colliers report, Winnipeg industrial market report. Demand for quality industrial space in Q2 of 2020 continues to hold firm. New product is quick to absorb, and sales values remain stable due to the strong fundamentals of the Winnipeg marketplace, despite these uncertain times. What's interesting on the next page here is they're talking about Northwest, Southwest and vacancy rates. There's no issue of vacancy, but our vacancy that we're using is quite fair. Davidson Young, Q4 of 2020, just talking about the industrial sector has not been 100% COVID proof. The performance of the industrial assets shows resiliency in 2020, and the vacancy rate is for Winnipeg was at 3.9%. And they just talk about how industrial has changed. We have the Amazon sales that have taken place for new properties, and they show that our market valuation has been fair. As an overview, if all the experts are stating that the industrial sector has been resilient and robust, why would the cap rate increase in their analysis from last cycle? In last cycle, a lot of their average cap rates were in the 6s, and now all of a sudden that has changed. It's not indicative of the Winnipeg marketplace. Thank you, and that concludes my rebuttal. Questions?
Okay. Questions, Mr. Slaughter, on the rebuttal?
Well, the first question, I guess, is, Mr. Froelich, when did we say that the cap rates increased? We are admitting a compression in the capitalization rate.
Yeah, but then you're also stating that the cap rate from last cycle's decision should be almost at 1% compared to what we're at today.
Sorry?
In your presentation, you said that there's a 90 points difference between the cap rate that was awarded at the revision level as compared to.
Once again, we're not going to be regarding last cycle's decision, given that we don't have any evidence that was presented at that time, and it's not our intent to include that in our analysis.
Yeah, fair enough. But Mr. Froelich, can we just agree that Altus is not suggesting that cap rates in general have increased? We are admitting that, depending on the property, of course, because some properties wouldn't have increased in cap rate, but for the most part, we're seeing a compression of 25 basis points. That's what we've stated in our materials. Is that correct?
Yes, but your cap rate study doesn't indicate that.
Well, no, that's a
Your
subset.
cap rate study is indicating that cap rates are increasing as opposed to going down.
Well, it's just a subset of properties we looked at. Our conclusions, though, are that cap rates typically have compressed 25 basis points. So I think it's a false statement to say that we're saying the cap rates have increased.
Yeah, I was just responding to how you'd answered one of the questions or your first question.
Okay, thanks. Second question, you brought up McKesson and how it was known that, one of the new properties being built at the reference date was to house McKesson. McKesson is in the subject property, correct?
But they vacated and they've moved.
Yeah.
It's that period of time and now they're on Haggart.
And that's exactly my point, because I was talking earlier about some of the risks in this property. We're not contesting the vacancy allowance because at the time it was fair. But we know McKesson's leaving in a couple of months. That's 40,000 square feet of space coming by. That's 10% of the area.
Yeah, but we're not going to also consider post-reference material either, so.
No, but I think Mr. Froelich was saying that it was known that McKesson was building a building in the north at that time. Is that what you're suggesting?
No, I wasn't suggesting that at all. Is that I was suggesting that as McKesson has changed what they wanted, because the marketplace has changed. And
so what you're talking about is post-reference then, because I'm not sure which one of us is post-reference.
Well, the bottom line is you're referencing how your stomach is feeling unease with the vacancy. So that McKesson space of 40,000 square feet is currently fully occupied.
Yeah, well,
so my stomach's feeling pretty good.
Yeah, well, no, mine wouldn't, because I know looking at the property. At the reference date, Mr. Chairman, we know that the lease expires in 4 months. So that is a concern. Anyway.
But vacancy is not in dispute, so let's not spend time arguing about something that's not in dispute.
Fair enough. Thank you. And then lastly, Mr. Froelich, we agree at Altus 100% with your position that we have to be consistent when we're developing cap rates. And that's one of the reasons why we expose exactly what we're doing, expose all of our, I don't think anybody else does. And we welcome comments and criticism. In fact, this rebuttal I have seen, we discussed as an office very seriously, the city's rebuttal. And there may be some changes. We evolve, we learn as we go. But fundamentally,
this isn't the question.
Yeah, I was thinking of how to lead it to a question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You would agree, Mr. Froelich, that even with the adjustments that you're making to those first two comparisons, 100 McPhillips and 110 Sutherland, that even if we change the market rents as you're suggesting, the conclusions wouldn't change. The cap rates for both these properties are still north of 7%. Is that correct?
Well, they would drop, but the point is using these as comparable cap rates to older inventory, because if we look at your last cycle there, Rod, because with you being said here, you have stated that cap rates have compressed since last cycle. Mm-hmm. So in terms of age and height, they're quite similar, but size is vastly different, right? And so what ends up happening here, and it's always hard because our profession is very vague in areas. It's very gray. There's different assumptions. So looking at an inventory, our cap rate study that we did is out there. It's not out there, but it's been supported by the work that we've done. One of your cap rates from the previous cycle is 6.5% on a building built in 1990. So if we're dealing with a construction of 2000 as opposed to not, and that cap rate's 6.5%. So with that being said, you have a building that's 10 years newer and where the rents are a bit higher, then moving forward from that, I believe that our cap rate is very fair.
Okay, Mr. Froelich, you agree that there are many... Sorry?
Excuse me, we're getting beyond rebuttal and just simply into debate, I think, but are there any more questions on Mr. Froelich's rebuttal evidence?
Yeah, just the one, Mr. Chairman, that following that comment that Mr. Froelich, you'd agree that there are other factors that we need to consider beyond age. That's certainly one, but there are other factors that we consider in the determination of a capitalization rate.
Yeah, for example, for this property here, it's a superior location than 333 Debates. And so, which is why I think another reason why our cap rate is justifiable.
At 5.6.
That's what we have, correct?
That's all the questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Hey, Richard, any questions on rebuttal evidence?
Nothing, thanks.
Gail, any questions on rebuttal?
No, I have no questions. Thank you.
Okay, all right. That concludes the evidence portion. Mr. Froelich, do you have a brief summation?
Yes, I do, and it will be brief. During the municipal board process that Rod and I have spent a lot of times on, there's always different factors that we need to look at. And so a lot of times agents will order one methodology, we'll do at another methodology, but we'll look at the overall value of the subject property and what can we both live with from a case management perspective to come up with a value. So when I look at this property here that is taking place, we all know it's hearing de novo. But with that being said, when a decision's made on a certain property, that doesn't set the template out for future reassessments. Panels are different information's presented. But one thing that I'm always mindful of is we know that real estate prices have not gone down in value since 2016. Agents may not talk about this, but it's an important aspect of why we come up with the market valuation process. With all the work that I've done here today, you know, our initial value was almost $61 million, and I've changed that to $58 million. And I think that's fair. There was a discrepancy of 18,000 square feet that's been adjusted. I've looked at the market rents that are used. 72% of our market rents are lower than the actuals. That's a huge component when you're dealing with 456,000 square feet of building space. And so meanwhile, you know, an applicant could talk about this or talk about that. When you're dealing with 72% of our market rents, model rents being lower than actual market that's in the system, that's significant. And getting back to my original point, in 2016, this property was not appealed and the value was at $43,256,000. 4 years later, 2018, it was cut to almost $47 million. Then all of a sudden in 2020, 4 years later, the new value is only $47,960,000, which is like a $44,488,000, which is a 27% reduction from our original market value. So say if our market value in 2020 of 57.5 was high, you know, I'll concede that. Other assessment, maybe $54, $53 million is fairer, that could be fine. But to perpetrate a mistake from our perspective, that the new value should be $50 million or just over $50 million, I don't feel that's fair to the taxpayer. My recommendation is the major cut on my recommendations. I've adjusted the rents. Our rents are 23, just let me double check here because I need to look at that. The agent rent was $8.21. My rent is $8.05. That's a significant amount when dealing with 433,000 square feet, which is why I believe my value of $57,831,000 is fair. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Slaughter, any summation without giving new evidence?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, it's basically this comes down to the shortfall allowance is a small item. It's based on the factual evidence of the actual expenses. The non-recovered expenses is a debatable one, but really that morphs into the bigger question of capitalization rate. And I feel strongly that the city has presented nothing to support 5.6%. In fact, the evidence that they've provided, the rebuttal they provided of our evidence, shows that the very lowest cap rate by most optimistic broker in their marketing materials is 5.75 for the top tier Class A. Most others are saying 6. And our evidence, our analysis, and we try to be as open as possible with the analysis, and we welcome criticisms, and we evolve with that. But the evidence seems to be pointing in the direction that the brokers are correct. 6% is a floor. The subject property is not at the top end of the A's, even if it is still considered an A. It's 23 years old. It has considerable amount of space potentially coming vacant very quickly. It would be at the, as Mr. Froelich had admitted, it would be at the top end of the range of Class A. And I think all evidence before us from all parties points to 6.5%. We're using 6.25. with the higher non-recoverable expenses. And I think it's supported, and I ask the board to consider the final value of 50 million to 11. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you for your time. Now we'll move on. That took considerable length of time, but let's move on to 1555 St. James Street.
My work here is done. I think there should be a quick recess to get the new assessor in for this
Okay.
property. And I'd like to thank Rod for all the time he spent with me on this file. And I'd like to thank all the panel members for listening through this. When it's a $60 million property, there's a lot of issues that need to be discussed. And so I appreciate the time that the panel members have spent listening to us go over this property. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break while the new assessor comes online. Now, okay, thank you. We'll reconvene with 1555 St. James Street. Oh, have we sworn? We got to swear in the applicant and assessor. So please do that, Mr. Robertson.
Actually, pause for 1 second. I don't know if we have sound.
I hear you.
No, but on stream.
Who are you? I thought,
Okay, we're good. Okay, perfect. That we do.
okay.
All right. Mr. Assessor,
Yes,
please state your full name.
Stephen Lobenstein.
Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
Rocky Neufeld.
Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, you may proceed.
You can proceed, Mr. Lovenstein.
Okay, I just have a preliminary issue I want to take care of before we get started. On my
Okay,
in my evidence, page 22 to 24, so 22, 23, and 24, I would ask the panel to disregard that evidence and not to put any weight on it today, please.
okay. All right, we shall do so.
Excellent, thank you. We'll get started then. So the property today is roll number 13000981500. The address is 1555 St. James Street. The assessed value is $15,153,000. We have a reference date of April 1st, 2021. So on page 1 for the property description, we have 3 buildings on this property. We have over 27 premises, so it's a multi-tenanted building. And there are 2 stories. One of the buildings is an office building with 2 stories on it. The actual year and effective year built, we have in 1975, and the wall heights range between 12 feet and 18 feet. The zoning we have at M3. And the land is 344,652 square feet for a gross floor area of 138,901 feet and a leasable area of 138,630 feet. The land to plan is 2.84. So moving on, we're just going to scroll down, if you will, to my page 10. You can get an idea of where the property is located. It's in the St. James area. It's pretty much on the corner of Dublin and St. James Street, close to the airport, close to Polo Park, not far from Notre Dame. By page 10, you can get an overhead look at the property. You can see how the property is outlined on the parcel of land. Where the red dot is, that would be the office building, and the rest of the building you can see is beside it. On my page 11, you can see another view. Again, you get the view of the office building right on the corner of St. James and Dublin. And further down on my page 12, you can see the property as well from a different angle. The rear of the property with all the overhead doors and the trailers parked in there to unload the materials. So moving back up, we're going to look at my page 5. So this is our our income for the office portion. So this will be the two-story office portion. You can see that we have a multitude of premises that range from 790 square feet all the way up to 5,437 square feet. We're applying a rent per square foot and we get our potential rent from that. So our rent per square foot is based off the market. It's a model rent, but it's based off the market. So when we look at my page 3, we can see my page 4, we can see some office rent comparables. For office rent comparables, I had to go out a little bit. There's some on Border, some in Pembina, and you can see the rent per square foot ranges from $11 all the way up to $12.58. So it's similar. So the market rents are similar to our model rents because our model is based off the market. And then further down on my page 2, you can see the industrial income stream. You can see the leasable areas for all the premises ranging from 1,875 feet all the way up to 34,696 feet. You can see the model rents per square foot. And then of course the potential rent. On my page 3 are my industrial rent comps. They're all within the St. James area, so they're all in close proximity to the subject property. The lease starts range from 2012 all the way up to 2020, so it gives you a good lease area, or a good lease range. And the term ranges from 3 years all the way up to 10 years. Leasable areas for these match the model rents or the model leasable areas ranging from 2,253 square feet all the way up to 37,521 square feet. The wall heights, as I spoke about earlier, for the subject property range from 12 to 18 feet. So the wall heights here range from 14 feet at the lowest all the way up to 28 feet at the highest. And of course, the effective years built range from 1959 all the way up to 2000. So they match they're somewhat close to the effective year built in 1975. So these are all net rents that our model are based off of. So they're net of all expenses. This is just for the lease of the area or the premise that they're leasing. So this is a 2 income stream property because there is an office portion and there is a storage warehouse portion of this property. So for the office portion on my page 5, we have a vacancy of 6% we're applying to the potential rent. We're applying 3% expenses and an overall capitalization rate of 7.1% to get an estimated value of $4,664,000. For the industrial income stream, the storage warehouse income stream, we're applying a 7% vacancy. That'll be a model 7% vacancy, expenses of 3%, and an overall capitalization rate of 6.4% to get an estimated value of $10,489,000. So going to my page 7, you can see the 2 model streams that are put together under the summary. You can see that the expenses stay at 3%. The shortfall would go up to 4.76%. The net operating income is at $1,002,421, and the capitalization rate is at 6.62% for an estimated market value of $15,153,000. Further on my page 8, we have our capitalization rate evidence. So industrial is the second chart down. You can see that the 20th to 8th percentile range from 5.5% all the way up to 7.45%. The office is there as well. They have ranges that range from 6 for A and 6.75 for B. They also have suburban A and suburban B as well, from 5.6 to 5 or 6.9. So you can see that our cap rates are well within the range of this property. So further down, I'll just use one outside source here on my page 21. You can see the Q1 2021 cap rate study for, I think, CBRE. And they have similar industrial rents, or sorry, cap rates from $5.75 to $6.50. and their Bs are from 6.5 to 7.25. So again, ours are within the range. Similar with their downtown office, they have 6.5, although this I would not, this is probably more of a suburban office possibly, at 6.75 to 7. We also have on page 15 is the income expense mailer of the property. It's on 16 as well. And 17, you can see the rent roll on page 18. You can see that there is the first rent roll is the commercial rent roll. They have a summary report where they show they only have 2 units vacant right now. One unit is 797 square feet. Another unit is 3,683 square feet. And the industrial, there's an industrial summary as well, where it shows no vacancy. So, yeah, sorry. So we feel that the value of 15,153,000 is fair and equitable and should be confirmed. Thank you.
Okay, questions, Mr. Newfeld?
Yes, sorry about that. I was just checking something. In regard to the height you mentioned here, first page, 12 feet, 18 feet. What does this refer to? Like, well, what's the difference here?
Just give me a moment. I should have went over the building here. I'm sorry. So there's 3 buildings on the property. The office building would be 17,348 square feet. We have that at 12 feet. And then the industrial buildings, they are both at 18 feet.
And sorry, what were the industrial buildings at, the ceiling heights?
18 feet.
Okay, and when the city reports ceiling heights, can you confirm that you're using outside measurements, exterior?
Yes, I'll confirm they're using exterior measurements.
Yeah, and do you have an interior height?
No, I mean, we might be able to get an interior height off the permit when we're looking at it, but we usually go from what the permit says, and they would probably be measuring from the outside.
Okay, why I'm asking is I just noted that, and that's what I was just reading, is that I was looking at your comparables and reading the Johnson report, who only do, or they're typically do interior clear height, and noting that there's some I always say discrepancies or variances in the manner that they're all reported. You list on your, I guess it's page 3, heights ranging from 14 to 23 feet, or sorry, 28 feet. And again, some of these were clear heights and some of them were exteriors. Did you have the chance then to try to compare apples to apples, so to speak?
I believe the wall heights that we would have here would probably be what we have in our systems. These would be from permits or from outside sources.
Okay, so you believe that these are all as well exterior heights?
Correct.
Okay. And when your model generates a number, do they take the interior or the clear height into consideration?
No, we would not.
Okay, so it's fair to say that in some cases you might be comparing a building such as this one, which probably has about 14 to 15 foot clear, with another building that could potentially have 27 foot clear.
I would try not to compare a 27 foot clear to a building that has 18 feet. Although in this case, I did compare one that is at 28 feet, only due to its size, because there weren't a lot of other comparables at 37,000.
Right, and that's what got me to thinking, because the one building you have in here that you list at 28 feet has got the highest rent in your table, and I'm just wondering if
well, it's this. No, the highest rent would be up a little bit, $8.78, and that's 17 feet.
it was number 1650 Notre Dame, 28 feet at 950. I'm reading.
Oh, sorry, my mistake, 950. Yeah, you're correct.
Okay, and so the subject, do you have this average? It's 7 something?
The average for the industrial rents for model rents, you mean?
Yeah,
I have not calculated the average for that.
oh, okay, that's fine. It's somewhere around, I guess,
Oh,
7,
I did.
7.
Sorry, it's $7.25. I have.
Okay. And then did you compare this to the statement?
Well, these are all model rents, so they were based off the market. The statement seems to be fairly accurate to what we're showing in our model rents, the actual tenant rolls.
Well, I guess I'm just looking at, for example, the total effective gross, sorry, the potential rent on both portions. And you have it at 1155, and on the statements. Oh, I hope I'm gonna switch views here. Which statement have we got here? 20. The potential rent is 1111, and I'm looking on page 15 at the actual year to date. So some variance there, but
Sorry, Rocky, I'm not really following what you're looking at right now.
yeah, okay, sorry, I made the mistake of looking at the wrong statement when I was reading my other screen, so I was switching to yours. The potential rent on the model is 1,155,000, and they are reporting at 1,111,000. You see that on page 15.
Okay.
Okay, so there's a small difference there. And the vacancy, I heard you say that something to the effect that there's only 2 vacancies. On page 15, aren't they reporting $185,000 in vacancy loss?
Page 15. Can you give me is there a numbered line item?
Yeah, well, it's under the column actual year to date, and it's the 5th entry.
So they have a negative 185,228.
That's correct. That's the vacancy loss.
Well, I was looking at the tenant roll on my page 18. And if you look down at the bottom, it says 0 vacant units, 100% occupied.
Right. And that's a rent roll, but the financial statements speak to 185,000, and you've allowed a vacancy loss of a total of 77,000. So I guess what I'm getting at is we have a big difference in effective gross income. You're at 1,078,000, and the statements would indicate a number that's about 830,000. And I don't know if that's what I was asking, if you had any sort of reconciliation on those two numbers.
Well, we're applying a 7% vacancy to the property, which is, typical within that area. I mean, it's done on a percentage basis. They're showing that they have, I'm not too sure why they're showing a 185,220 vacancy for rent when they seem to be fully occupied, except for a small portion in the office building. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think what you can see is when you're looking at a rent roll, you get a skewed outlook of it, where there's tenancies that expire and tenancies that start, and there's no indication of the period it covers, or you actually have to manually calculate it. So I was just, okay, that's fine. It's you're relying on the model. So and the model, the blended rate was, as you had indicated. Sorry, let me get back to that page. I'm not very good at doing this stuff online. I like papers. Now
Page 7.
I'm on page 7, the allowance for expenses, 3% at $32,000. And again, did you compare that to the statement, which was approximately $310,000, which included shortfall? But was that not a consideration that non-recoverables were very high?
Well, I did find it interesting when I was looking at the statement and the non-recoverables. So as I scroll to, that'll be on page 17, it says non-recoverable expenses. They have 2 incredibly high line items for landlord work and leasing fees. So I thought that was somewhat odd, but that was that high. So I went back and looked at past years, and in past years, a lot of times those are 0 or far lower in like $5,000 or $7,000 range. So, I mean, we are, because of the way we do it, the direct income approach, we do look at 1 year. Although I would say these net operating expenses or these non-recoverable expenses are quite high for this year.
Yes, and so the question is, when one goes to try to stabilize, looking at a longer term, do you think the 3% is reasonable considering what they've gone through?
Just from looking back at what I saw, I would say the 3% is reasonable. I mean,
okay. The cap rate, you have 2 revenue streams here. Is this one titled property or are there multiple titles?
it's one title property, but there's 2 different types of buildings on it. So we've distinguished between the 2.
So, but is it possible to sell half of this site, to sell the office or to sell the industrial on its own?
It would be possible if they decided to separate out the office from the property.
No, that's called hypothetically. It's not at this point in time today for your valuation as of April 1st, 2021. It was not separated, was it?
Sure. No, and that's fair, but I don't think it's unfair to put office rents on the office portion, because we can also see on the rent roll that they are demanding higher rents than the industrial.
This particular process, though, of doing multiple revenue streams, this is an assessment department methodology that you're applying then?
And compared to what?
I don't know. Have you ever seen it being used elsewhere?
We have used it. I haven't seen it being used by other people.
On page this is just more of my curiosity here, but on page 13, you've attached this COVID questionnaire.
Mhm.
And I have the act in front of me, looking at 16.1. Aren't these questions opinions that are being requested?
Sorry, are these questions are what?
Aren't they opinions that you're asking here?
I would think that us sending these out to the property owners, they would have an idea if COVID actually affected their businesses at the time.
But there's nothing in this of any substance whatsoever, and I believe that it's predicated by asking opinions rather than the act would suggest, which would be any income or expense related to the use or operation of the property. Are these going to be coming out with every tax appeal that you're going to display their questionnaire?
It's possible. It's something that I've included. I think it's something that we sent out with the income expense mailer. So I'm just being thorough and including all the information that was returned to us.
Okay, well, there's some questions here. Oh, okay. Sorry. And I thank you very much for dealing with my earlier a concern about the Collier's cap rate report. In the other industry sources you quote, are these companies located in Winnipeg?
Oh, sorry.
Or wait, I'll rephrase that. Are you aware that none of the other companies that you've sourced have a location in Winnipeg?
I am not aware if they do have an office here or not, no.
Okay. And sorry, those are my questions. I was just lost for a while there. It took a bit longer than I needed to.
Okay, Richard, any questions of the assessor?
I have none. Thank you.
Okay, Gail.
No, I have no questions. Thank you.
And I have no questions, so you can begin, Mr. Neufeld.
Thank you. The subject property is, as the assessor mentioned, is a mix of an office and an industrial use at the corner of St. James and Dublin. And the issue we've had over the years with this property is the difficulty in leasing the office space because of its location, and the difficulty in leasing the industrial space because of the lack of clear height. You'll note that the assessor has stated 18 feet, and I don't disagree with him on that's the exterior height, but the interior heights are about 14 feet, and that's low class space. So what you won't be able to do is any loading. A pallet is typically 5 feet tall, so you can fit 2 pallets in there, versus a modern 27-foot clear, which can do 5 pallets. And essentially, the better rents are coming to high cube space, and so this is getting more of a casual style of rental of a semi-industrial user who needs a bit more office function and still needs loading at the back. You'll note that, and I don't think the assessor's pictures nor mine show it very well, but the rear doors are 14 feet, which extend to the bottom of the clear height. And they do have dock and grade, but it's really questionable that you would need a dock height when you have very little interior height. It's limited maneuvering space. From the picture on my page 1, you can see that even though there are docks at the back, there's no real room for semi-trailer maneuvering unless you trespass in the neighbor's property, which of course you can do at the front, but not at the back. I'm just looking at the street photography, and then actually, no, you can't trespass on it. There's a tree line. So modern semi-trailer maneuvering capability is you need about 125 feet clear to make a turn in a semi. So this limits its interest. So we have 2 factors that are impact on the utility. On the positive side, it's a good location if you have more of a retail orientation, as St. James is going that way. And we know that the M3 zoning, that the city is wanting to gentrify that zoning and try to get more retail users in the neighborhood and move the M3 uses to areas outside more around the perimeter areas or outside where people live. Now, regardless of all that preamble, the bottom line is always the statement and how much money it makes. And we've included the same statements that the assessor has provided. And I'm looking on my page 3 right now. And what you can see there is on the first section on the income, under the column actual year to date, is the vacancy issue. Now, it's not fair to just look at the rent roll. If you peruse the rent roll, you'll see turnover is what you'll see. You won't see occupancy. You'll see you're losing tenants and you're replacing them and backfilling them, and you're doing turnover. This statement indicates 16% vacancy. The last cycle, we looked at, the statement was at 9.5% vacancy. And its turnover and its loss of rental revenue. The statement doesn't lie or mislead. This is cash. And what we've done, though, is we have stabilized it at a lower vacancy rate. And because, again, you try to, as the assessor said earlier, you try to consider all the years in your workup, and it has had better years. Probably 5 or 6 years ago, the performance was better. So in our workup, we've used a 6.8% overall vacancy, and that was just predominantly an industrial office split based on the neighborhood and on the actual income. So you can see that we had the 1,116,000 potential income, 75,000 for vacancy rather than 185,000 for vacancy. However, the other differences that we've had are in the non-recoverables. Now we're using 5% and 2%, which is $72,000 for that. Now the actual losses there, which are because of the high vacancy go into the shortfalls, are shown on page 3 under that same column where you have the operating cost loss of 73,900, property tax loss of 51,301, in addition to the listing of the non-recoverables later on. And those are listed at the landlord's work, which we probably wouldn't consider as a non-recoverable. It's probably a capital expense, but leasing fees are definitely part of the non-recoverables. Now, we would never put that all in 1 year and use it as an expense. What we're doing is, I was listening a bit to Mr. Slaughter earlier, is proper methodology. You incur expenses, sometimes they're high, sometimes they're low, and you have to apply a rate that takes into account those variances. And the industry average, what we're using is 2% and 5%. Just take you to the last 2 pages of my report. And what this is page 43 and 44. I've been doing this. This is my work. These are Colliers managed properties, and I've been going through all the statements and getting the NOIs, or sorry, the revenues, making a small adjustment of 5%, so the formula makes sense with valuation, and then listing the non-recoverables and providing what they are. And you can see that there's some ones with very high numbers, 86%, and there's some with very low numbers. So you have good years and you have bad years. This got clipped. The average is 13.33%, but you know the report was clipped. That's the mean. The median is about 8%, and we've applied a total of 7%. This is the nature of investment properties, the nature of non-recoverables. And you can see that some of them include an asset management fee. Sometimes it's on the statement, sometimes it's not, but that is a deduction. It's proper, because what we're looking for is how much money does the owner get to put in his bank from the operation. And all of these are reasonable costs. And as I said, you in the long run, you're not putting weight on neither the large nor the small. You're looking at the universe. And just there was one here I wanted to show you that was interesting. Yes, the first on page 43, the third and fourth entries, 10 Keenly side. That's an interesting property in that the 2017 they had a fire and incurred a lot of costs, and non-recoverables in that case were leasing commissions to relet the space, and not capital. The capital was covered by the insurance claim. And in that year, the non-recoverables were 86%, but after stabilization at 5.64. So we wouldn't average those out, and 86 is way too high. 5.6 is too low because they just finished filling the place up. So we haven't reached a turnover stage where we're going to go back to our original cycles. And that you can see in some of the other buildings. Another one is further down is that we have 4 years at 200 Portage. It went from 0.56%, which is when Bank of Nova Scotia owned it. And then they left and we had 33% for commissions to put in G3. And then when that stabilized, it went back to 1.07. And that's what you would expect in the cycle of properties. It goes up, it goes down, and what's a fair number? And perhaps the city may have picked those examples and properties in their good years. We're trying to be very clear about this and show you good years, bad years, and the nature of investment and returns. So that was the one difference. Now we have a very minor difference on capitalization. And the reason why is the concept of revenue, multiple revenue streams is not proper in valuation methodology. You can't value two halves and add it up. I actually did that my first job when I became a candidate member, and I handed my work product to my mentor to approve, and he told me to, well, he said, had some very choice words for me, and I never did that again. You can't sell half a property. It's considered as a whole, which means you've got to run it as a whole, and anything you use for a comparable has to be similar in that respect. It's a common error. It's a shortcut that it's inappropriate. So what we were doing is looking at as a whole, and the biggest question, and I'm now on page 2. I don't think any of you have heard my story yet, but this is the year where we're actually looking at the whole concept of direct capitalization, and in this case, because we're not far apart, I'll make it very, very brief. Colliers over for the last few years and this is not my work, this is their work, and I'm talking now starting at page 28. Colliers has noted that there's been some problems with reporting cap rates, that people are forgetting what a cap rate really is. And page 29 is the reason the cap rate exists. It doesn't exist for assessors or appraisers or agents. It exists because the bank wants to know if you have the money to pay the mortgage, period. And the more that you see these outlandish low rates, they don't represent the market anymore. They represent creative financing. That's not to say the deals won't make somebody money, but there's something else in there that drives that rate. It's no longer direct capitalization. Direct capitalization has always had to have a link to the money markets. And you can see on page 29 that this is the way Colliers is looking at it now. Here you got a 4-point spread between the bond rate and the cap rate. And it's maintained itself and it's flowed really consistently. And we also ended up doing, there's another Colliers report after the cap rate report. Then you'll see our cap rate report, by the way, page 33 now implements the spread in the actual cap rates to let people know that the importance. Now on page 38, this is our new publication, and what's called Debt Advisory Service. And what we're now trying to do is explain this in greater detail. So page 39 has the same table that's in the cap rate study, and it goes on to show different returns and compares caps to yields. And page 39 has a few of these. And page 40 has the base rates that were looked at for this report. The reasoning behind it was remind parties. Now, so if you do think that a low cap rate exists, you really have to prove things like the impact of preferential financing, or after sale, there's going to be a bump in revenue that's been scheduled, and then it should be reported a little bit more straightforward. You should actually explain to the reader that, look, the sale may have indicated 5.5%, but tenant A was going to have a $2 bump effective a month after sale, which would have showed 7%. And those are the things that are happening, is just not being transparent in your analysis. And again, we're not far off, but we're sticking with it this year. So the Colliers cap rate is now changed from less looking at direct sales, but more looking at what we used to do all the time, which is band of investment or mortgage equity, which is the link between money markets and rates. Because face it, our job is 95% of appraisers' work has been to advise banks how much money to extend to somebody, and they need to know that the revenue generated by the site will pay the mortgage. And I'm repeating this to you, even though it's not a major difference here, is because it is in certain property types, and I'm going to be saying it again and again and again. Now, the Colliers cap rate analysis, the 28 points, we've reworked it a bit this year. I'm trying to be a little bit more transparent. And on page 30 is an explanation of how we get to these, what constitutes each of these 23 items. And the 23 items were not created by me, they were created by Colliers. These are the things we must look at. And one of the things I always like to point out is closing costs, number 3. Anytime a Colliers cap rate is published, we include closing costs. For example, I have one in front of me right now, and I'm only quoting this for information only. We have a sale of 2.8 million, in this case, $88,000 in closing costs. Normally, you don't see that in a cap rate because that's not part of the cap rate. Colliers thinks it does, and we make an adjustment for it. Now, going back to the cap briefly, and the only reason I'm going over this is because it'll also highlight some of the income issues. On the optimal rate is 6% for a property like this, and we've just adjusted it by deductions from the optimal rate. Closing costs, as I just mentioned. Now, the amount of that particular adjustment, in case you want to disagree with me, is 0.05 percentage points. So if you said, no, I don't believe that closing cost, then the actual indicated number would be 6.83%. So these are all small adjustments. The major issues, and these are the ones that relate to the potential to generate income as well, is configuration. And office or warehouse, pick one. You'll perform better if you pick one. This is not a good design. And you have the parking and maneuvering area for trucks is another issue on that. Design and layout, again, bad layout for them, and adaptive uses. The ceiling height, that goes hand in hand with condition and year built and quality. Low ceiling height. Income growth potential. I've studied this property for 14 years, and really the rents have peaked. It has nowhere to go. So those were our issues. These are all very, very small adjustments from the optimal. So we're at 7%, and the assessor's at I think average says 6.67, I think was his number. Again, it's not a major issue, but it's an important issue in regard to getting it right and applying the proper theory. You can't do split revenue streams and expect to have a reliable number. Sorry, the assessor said 662. So the bottom line here is this is the actual revenue. It's actually higher than the actual revenue. We've adjusted the vacancy downwards, and the vacancy is worse than it was the last time it was assessed in 2020. And if anything, the value should be going down, not up. And the last assessment on it, there's a bit of a typos here, was 13,240,000, and we believe that the poorer performance in the vacancy world drops it to 13,010,000. And I think that in our COVID world, that those numbers make a lot of sense. This isn't good space. This is my last comment. I'm done. But we've been watching the market, and there have been phenomenal growth in the industrial world, and great competition and demand. But all of that has been on distribution buildings, not buildings like this. And a distribution building is going to have cross dock, 28 minimum inside space, some up to 33, and allow semis to come in one side and delivery trucks to go out the other side. And anecdotally, think of the world where we've been buying our stuff during COVID. We're not going to the store anymore. It's being delivered to our door. And that truck is coming from one of these newer facilities that has a semi-trailer access on the other side. So it's a shift from retail to industrial. And the operators save money because it's cheaper to have a couple of delivery guys than a bunch of salesmen, and the rent for industrial is still much less than retail. So we see that shift, which was pronounced during COVID, will stick around. Maybe not as strong. Maybe retail will come back a bit, but industrial like that grew, and we acknowledge that there's going to be some increases in value, but this is not one of those sites. This is not suitable for that. On the office side, it's been a disaster. The home office companies.
I mean, we still got a lot of properties to do. And
no, I know. I just said. Last comment on this still has the office portion in it. And the office world has seen dramatic losses, home office, people reconsidering where they want to locate. You will see the biggest impact between 23 and 24 as leases expire and people make plans. We already know what's going to happen. Thank you. That's my presentation.
Okay, questions, Mr. Levinson?
Just a few. So you referenced your Kohler's report. You said that this report now calculates cap rates differently than in the past. Yet on page 34, they show a chart of industrial high and lows, and they're at 6 and 6.75, similar to the office. Yet, so they're calculating it differently, like you said they should, and yet you still chose 7%. Should you not have chose something within this chart?
No, not at all. I mean, when I said that they're calculating differently, that didn't imply that the numbers would necessarily have an impact. What we found in the last few years is that there's been far more creative financing deals, for lack of a better word, and deals that didn't conform to the concept of direct capitalization. They weren't looking at existing revenue stream, and they were looking at speculative revenue streams or different ways of financing. Remember that at one point we had Bank of Canada rates at 0.25%. That really changed a lot of things. Those aren't what you should be using for rates. Now, when you ask, should I be using in that? Yes, we have a range of suburban office and industrial, both between 6 and 6.75. And remember, these are impacted by closing costs. So they would be a range of 6.15 to 6.9. And we went to 7 because adding office to industrial doesn't strengthen each, it weakens each.
Actually, those are all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, Richard, any questions?
I have none, thanks.
Okay, Gail, any questions?
No, I have no questions. Thank you.
Okay, brief summation, Mr. Assessor.
I have no summation.
Okay, Rocky, brief submission.
I was counting on him saying something. You'll humor me for 20 seconds.
Okay, 19, 18.
Uh, I'm getting there. I'm getting there. Okay. Yes. My summation is basically this property has had a severe impact from market conditions, changing market conditions in the last few years, and the income is lower than it was 2 years ago, and you can, and I've testified to that. It's higher vacancy. The values should be going below last year's assessment, not above. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That concludes this property. Now we will move onwards to 630 Century Street. Thank you very much.
Right. Bye.
Thank you, Rocky.
Thanks.
I have 530 Century Streets.
Me too.
Oh, 530, sorry. That's what happens. I dim the lights to so they're not shining in everybody's eye.
Okay, and I'm just going to grab the applicant.
Just a question. It's doing, I wonder if we could take a 7-minute break and I can go plug my meter.
Okay, go ahead.
Changing assessors, correct? So
Yes.
I'm
No,
sorry,
not assessors.
applicants. Yes,
Yes.
thank you.
All right. Let's move on to 530 Century Street. Mr. Assessor, you may proceed.
Okay, so the roll number is 070021432200. I think there is an issue of class and liability with this one, though.
Is it class and liability? Okay. Let's see. All right. Well, on classification liability, Mr. Slaughter, I guess you have to proceed first then on class and liability.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could ask the board then please to turn to the direct evidence for 530 Century.
Can I just state something? I'm not in disagreement with Mr. Slaughter's application for it, so I'm not going to fight it. So I assume he probably still wants to go through his evidence, but I'm just saying that the city is in agreement with them.
Okay.
Basically applying.
Just briefly give us your evidence, and Mr. Slaughter on class and liability.
Sure, thanks, Stephen. So on page 16 is the issue. Basically, in the property is a multi-tenant property, 3 buildings, and there are 2 tenants within the property now, as of the reference date, that, in our opinion, were considered to be charitable organizations primarily for the purpose of giving relief or assistance to aged, indigent, or sick persons. And so the first one is Visions of Independence. They basically teach skills through a combination of community outings, on-site workshops, skills-related classes for individuals with intellectual disabilities. And last cycle, actually, the city and Altus had agreed that that tenancy, that unit, would be considered exempt from school taxes via the legislation, section 23(1). So all that's happened, Mr. Chairman, is that that tenant has expanded their space. So it's a change in the area. They've expanded their space, and we're asking that the new space as well be exempt. But in addition, there's a second tenant that's come in since last time. They're called SCE LifeWorks. And similar to Visions of Independence, they focus on programming that facilitates employment and independent living for individuals with intellectual disabilities. So we have in evidence all the documentation about the organization, but it's like a sister organization, I think, to Visions of Independence, and we feel that the same exemption should apply. So if that sums it up, Mr. Chairman, enough for you. That's good. I could go through for evidence, but yeah.
Okay. So, and Mr. Levenstein, the city does not object to the changes?
No, we don't object. And the only thing we'd like to say is we understand this is one process to get exemptions. You can also apply to the city, and we can look at it and giving.
Yes.
It doesn't have to go, but I understand maybe time was an issue. Mr. Slaughter just came across this when he was doing his brief, so that's fine. But no, we're not objecting to this.
Thank you.
Okay, and then Ms. Lamson, you can proceed on value that, and do you have to make then some changes to your valuation?
I haven't yet. It's like the changes will just come with the class and liability. The actual valuation of the property will not change. So
But the 40 and the exempt and taxable will change. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. 530 Century Street. We can see there's already a split class on this property, so that will increase after this. We have an overall assessed value of $15,278,000. My property description, you can see that we have number of buildings of 3, number of premises of 33, so it's a very large multi-tenant building. Some of the buildings have 2 stories, and the effective years range built from 1978 to 1979. And the wall heights range from 11 feet on some of the second floor office space to 22 feet for the warehouse spaces. We have N1 zoning and the land area of 343,071 square feet and gross floor area of 135,415 feet. Of course, the leasable area is a little bit less, and the land to plan is 2.98. On my page 2, you can see there are some previous sales. They're quite dated from the subject on page 2 from when the reference period is a 2002 sale or 2009 sale. Okay, going forward, we're just going to scroll down again to get an idea of where this property is located. So it's 530 Century Street. So this would be on my page 11. You can see the map. It's kind of where I guess Route 90 forks. The property is right in the middle there. It's in the St. James area, so near the airport, near Polo Park. Page 11, you can get an above head view of the property. You can see the 3 different properties. The property with the red dot on it has the 2nd story space. Again, you can see on my page 12, you can see a couple more looks at this property and how the buildings are situated on the property. So again, we'll go back up to the income stream. So we classify this as a flex warehouse. This is on my page 6. You can see the number of premises we have, the leasable areas that we're applying, and then our model rent, and of course our potential rents. So again, our model rents are taken from the market. So my market rent comparables are on page 3. They are all in a similar area of the subject property. So we have Dublin, St. James, Barrie, Notre Dame, Wellington, Sherwin. It's all in very close proximity to subject property. You also want to look at the lease starts and the lease terms. So the lease starts are close to the reference date, somewhere in 2020, 2019, 2018. And of course, the lease terms, a typical lease term is 5 to 10 years for industrial properties. And we see that here as well. These rent comparables have similar leasable areas to the premises, and they have similar wall heights to ranging all the way up to 28 feet, but 17 feet, 16 feet, as low as 14 feet. And then you can see the rent ranges as well. So they're similar to the model rent, where I guess the model is based off the market, and they range from $8 all the way up to $9 and 50 cents a square foot. So going down to my page 6, you can see our income stream. So our income stream here, we have a leasable area of 126,136 square feet. We're applying a vacancy of 7%, expenses of 3%, and overall capitalization rate is 6.3%. So this is, we do split up our income streams here because of the class and liability. So this is our first income stream for the majority of the property. And our second income stream, again, was for where the split class comes in. And we were applying 3,843 square feet, $8.65 a square foot, 7% is the vacancy, 3% expenses, and of course the same capitalization rate is 6.3% for an estimated value of $460,000. So again, on my page 9, you can see the two income streams are put together, although they are, unlike the previous one, this is not an office and industrial property. This is just one industrial property. And we get our estimated market value of $15,270,000. On page 9 is our capitalization rate evidence. You can see the multi-tenant, single tenant, they range from 5.5 to 7.45. So this property sits somewhat in the middle, and that's the 20th to the 80th percentile. So we can see that on my page 17, we're starting to look at the income expense mailer that's sent in. This is a very large income expense mailer due to the fact that there's 3 properties on it and there's over 30 tenants in this building. So I tried to break it down at the very end here. They're quite clear though. Like if you look on page 21, you can see the bottom, their net income, their non-recoverable operating expenses, a few lines above that. So they've broken them all down into 3 separate buildings. So on my page, sorry, I'm going to go down a bit here. On my page 31, I've taken the liberty of pulling out the net operating income from each building for a total of $1,137,014. So that is what the building is generating in that year, the reference year for net operating income. So that's voidable expenses. And then just on my page 32, I have the outside sources. So you can see the CBRE one with the industrial ranging from 5.75 to 6.5 for their A and 6.75 to 7.25 for their B. So again, our cap rate is right in that range. We feel the value of $15,278,000 is fair and equitable and should be confirmed today. Thank you.
Okay, and then the exempt and taxable will need to be readjusted though, right? Correct?
Yes, well, I mean, depending on how I guess the values today, whether it's confirmed, or that's where it will have to be adjusted, yes.
Okay, thank you. Questions, Mr. Slider?
No questions, thank you.
Okay, Richard, questions?
No, thank you.
Gail, questions?
Just in regards to the classification adjustment, the expansion of the 40S, just so that I understand that, is that tracked through the agreement with the owner then, the occupier's agreement with the owner as to how long that extends? Like if a different tenant comes in, right, the classification would need to be revisited. So
Correct.
That's just my question. How is that monitored?
Yeah, well, that would be monitored through, we would be doing inspections of the property. We'd be looking at rent rolls when they're sent in. So if we notice that one of these tenants has vacated, we'll have to go and confirm that they have left, and we will have to change the class and liability back to 60T.
Okay, so with the one tenant, the Visions of Independence, they've got an expanded footprint, correct? So did you pick that up through the tenancy, or it was brought to your attention?
It was brought to our attention. So that's another way. It can be brought to our attention through the tenant or through the owner of the building or the owner agent, as or agent for the owner has happened here. So
okay, that was my questions. Thank you.
All right, and I have no questions, so you can proceed, Mr. Clark.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we'll go back to the main brief from Altus, and again, Mr. Levenstein has gone through the property, so I won't repeat too much. Again, there's 3 buildings on site. The first one is 530 Century, that's southernmost, and that is a little different than the other 2 because it's actually an office. So 2-story and almost all office finish. It was built in 1979. The other two are more standard flex warehouse, so warehouse with some built-out space at the front. And those two buildings are on the west. We have 117 King Edward Street East, also built in 1979, and it has a wall height of 22 feet. So these are what we consider to be the Class B sort of investment grade. They're older, shorter ceiling height than is typically preferred today. And turning ratios can be a little difficult with these buildings at times because they didn't contemplate 64-foot trailers at that time. In this property, that's not as much a concern. And then the third building is 550 Century. It's built in 1978 with an 18-foot wall height. So we go to the page 11. Again, the income approaches to the preferred approach for the property, such as the subject. And we've done an analysis of all of the rents in place. And again, it's a market analysis, but unless we have some reason to not apply the contract rent, typically the contract rent will be the best indicator. And then we apply market to vacant space and make any deductions to semi-gross or gross rents. And the net result, Mr. Chairman, is that our rents are slightly higher than what the city has applied on a market approach. And we're staying with that. So we're applying our analysis, which has slightly higher rents. One might ask why we're here. The main reason is because of what we do with those rents after. Similar to what we presented earlier, we feel strongly that a multi-tenant property like this, although we may not see it on any individual year, there should be an amortized allowance for typical non-recovered expenses. And I'll save us going through the presentation again on non-recovered expenses, but the same logic applies here. And again, it's important to know that we may not see it on any one particular year, a great amount of non-recovered expenses, because it's an amortized expense amount that typically will come higher when it's at times of lease turnover. You know, that's where we see these waves come up. But on an amortized amount, we find, because our study looks at stabilized expenses, we find that the 7% is appropriate. The second, we have no contention with vacancy allowance. The second contention, and this is very similar to the earlier this morning, shortfall should be based on the actual expenses that are incurred. Those are what are typically recovered. So if we're trying to determine what isn't recovered from a tenant not in place, we should look no further than the actual expenses. And the actual expense in this property, expenses are, they vary. On the warehouse portion, and you can see this on the rent rolls, the expenses would be $644 a square foot. And for the office building, the southernmost one, it is as high as $11. So we have considerably higher expenses here, actual recoverable expenses, than the blanket 385 rate. And what we've done is we've just used $6.50 a square foot. Just to be clear, we don't typically use 100% of the recoverable expenses. We're sometimes a little south of that, maybe 90%, with the logic that perhaps in the vacant units there might be less utilities or waste clearing. You know, it'll be a bit less. But we feel that definitely 385 is not sufficient, so we use 650. And then the last item of contention is the capitalization rate. So we discussed earlier this morning that what the city has in evidence is kind of just a range of broker reports and what their cap rates that they've determined are, but we don't see those. We don't know how they're determined. We don't know what they are, you know, how to compare them. We try and be a bit more transparent. We've had the 5 comparisons that we discussed earlier. And then we look again to the broker reports. And again, we don't know exactly the methodology upon how they're done. But they do give us a general sense. And when our evidence is not in dispute with what the brokers are stating, we feel pretty strongly. And so for the reasons I mentioned this morning, what we're looking at is we admit a compression in most industrial, not all, most industrial of around 25 basis points. Now, I know we're not supposed to talk about previous decisions, but the subject property for 2020 was applied a 7% cap rate. That's not what we're using as a basis, but just to give you a sense. So 6.3 in our mind is too low. And the main reason we would say that, Mr. Chairman, is this is not a Class A. You know, I don't think there's any dispute that this is not a Class A industrial property. This would fit in the Class B category. And when we look to the brokers, we see a bifurcation between those two classes. higher rates on Class B, and they generally are in the 6.5 to 7.5 range. So 6.3% we feel too low. We feel that 6.75% is more appropriate. And again, that's with the inclusion of the 7% non-recovered expenses. So on page 15, we have our summary. Slightly higher rents than what the city's applied. Static on the vacancy allowance. It's $6 a square foot we use for the shortfall. $6 on the shortfall. 7% for the non-recovered. And then we capitalize our net operating income at 6.75%. The total value of the property, Mr. Chairman, would be $13,809,000. But when we take the increased areas for the school tax exempt tenancies, we would have a classification 40S at 1.45 million and the remainder of taxable at 12,359,000. So we've broken that down on page 15. A lot of the evidence is either the financials that the assessor mentioned or supporting documentation for the classification argument, as well as the last board order. I will conclude our presentation there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, questions, Mr. Assessor?
Just a few. On your page 12, looking at your shortfall,
Yeah.
you've stated that you're using the actual for that year, but then for the non-recoverable expenses, you don't want to use the actual. You're still using the 7%. Can I ask why you decided to pick the actual shortfall for 1 year, but not the actual non-recoverable expenses for 1 year?
Yeah, well, first of all, this shortfall, I am using 1 year, but there's no reason that shortfall changes. I mean, I can show you year after year where the shortfall will be relatively consistent, increasing, of course, but relatively consistent. But, you know, in assessment and appraisal methodology, two of the allowances typically are stabilized, and those are vacancy and non-recovered. We don't typically use the year vacancy. You know, we'll use something from market, or if there's a reason to believe that over a stabilized period, the vacancy allowance should be higher than market, then that is applicable. But those two are stabilized. In the case of non-recovered, it's actually an amortized amount. So it's over the life of the property. And, you know, I was doing a lot of thinking about this, of why it was applied in the first place, why the city of Winnipeg would have used the 7%, why the other assessing authorities 7% as an amortized amount. And I thought it makes sense because otherwise it's one more item that will constantly fluctuate. I mean, every year this item can be different. As I say, if you have relatively high occupancy in a property, your non-recovered expenses should be fairly low. But if you have a year of instability or a lot of change in your tenancies, they skyrocket. They go well past 7%. And you get this wave effect through the life of the property. So rather than have values going up and down, I was kind of thinking about this after the 2020 debates that we had. And I thought it makes sense to amortize it. So anyway, I hope that answers your question, Mr. Wellston.
Yeah, and just on your page 13, you have investment categories, Class A, Class B, non-investment grade. And why would you consider this a Class B? It obviously generates a high income. It's highly tenanted. It's in a good area. Why would this be a Class B?
All of those factors you mentioned are reflected, in my opinion, in the net operating income. I agree with all of them, but we've recognized those. In fact, we've recognized them a bit to more of an extent in the city because we're using a higher total rent. But again, the capitalization rate is looking at what does the investor expect as a rate of return, and looking at that income. Once we recognize that we're getting good rents, we have decent occupancy, this is a good location. Okay, great. What do I think is going to happen into the future? This building was built in 1979. You know, that's the number one reason why it suggests that this is not a Class A. And what that means is that the economic life before you have to start investing more and more capital to keep up that income is increased. That's the number one reason, Mr. Robinstein, why this would not be Class A. A second reason is this comes down to the risk component of the capitalization rate. We're doing well right now with rents, yes, but what does the future hold when you know that all of the new stock is being built with higher ceiling heights, turning ratios that accommodate modern day trailers, and other factors which are more accommodating to tenants' needs today? These type of properties will quickly become considered obsolete in the market. And so again, that's going to be a factor that in my mind, I want a higher rate of return if I'm investing in this income. So for those two primary reasons, this is a Class B property, and I have no qualm about that statement.
Those are all my questions.
Okay, Richard, questions?
No, I have none, thanks.
Okay, Gail, any questions?
Just going back to the 40S classification, so it being extended to an additional tenant now, right? Is that a new tenant?
It's two things. The Visions of Independence actually expanded.
Right.
And then there's this other tenant that came in as well, SCE LifeWorks. So it's both.
Okay, so that will reduce, like that will make them exempt from school taxes, that portion of the building. So my question is then with the new tenant particularly, like, is there an adjustment? Is that savings realized by the tenant?
That's a very good question. Because, and the reason actually that we often will bring this up through hearing rather than directly with the city sometimes is because we're working for the property manager or the owner, right? The owner's leases state that they have to base I shouldn't say they do. They may state that they have to proportion the taxes based on a proportionate share. We have a tax amount and you have 10% of the area, you owe 10% of the taxes. So if the owner took that school tax exemption and applied it only to SCE LifeWorks, for example, their unit, there could be a case where other tenants say, well, wait a minute, that's not a proportionate share. So the answer really lies with how the property manager allocates at the end. And I can't state how that will happen. But the fact is the existence of that tenant with their operations warrants the exemption. And whether or not it's fully recognized by the tenant will be up to the property manager.
Right, it would be in everybody's agreements, right?
It could. I don't want to state anything because it's not my position. I have seen that most of the time the tenant will see the results of that and the other tenants accept it. There has been areas of contention. So all I'm suggesting is the property manager has to be aware of it. It's a very good question. It's something we have to be aware of. It's why we present on behalf of the owner so that we stay out of, we're out of it. We're just saying that they are exempt and then do what you may with your leases.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you. So I've got no questions. So let's move on to item 4 on the agenda. Which I understand is a substantial agreement on 801 Century. Oops. All right, Mr. Levinson, you may proceed.
So I'm not actually exactly too sure how to proceed because we do have an agreement on this, just Rod needs to sign it.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, maybe I'll speak. We do have an agreement. It's a 15-1 agreement, so the appeal will effectively be withdrawn at a reduced amount. My error, I sent Stephen this morning the unsigned copy. So as soon as I get back to the office, I'll send him the signed copy. So if the board doesn't mind, well, I guess, could we keep this as a 54-1 for the moment until you receive the 15-1 agreement?
You want a 50? Okay, well then we will at least need to have the base information read into the record then.
Well, actually, let me think about this. Maybe that's not even the right answer. Can we just pause on this until I get the 15-1 to both parties by this afternoon, basically when I get back to the office? And Stephen, then I'll send it right to the board as well. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, then let's carry this one over so you can do it 15-1. Then and get it signed off this afternoon. Then.
Yeah.
That? Okay.
Yeah, I'll send the signed agreement to Mr. Levinstein and the BOR box as soon as I get back to the office.
Okay. Then we will skip to item 7, which is 1777 Ellis. Okay, let me just pull that up then. Okay, 1777 Ellis, Mr. Lobenstein.
Okay,
Mr. Chair, could I interrupt you?
Okay,
What about King Edward?
we're moving that to the very end because again, on Ellis, I think there's an agreement that they wish to have.
Also, we're going to discuss it later.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. And a recommendation that will be accepted as I understand it. So,
yeah,
Mr. Lobenstein, you may proceed.
Sure. Yeah, the roll number is 0702124500. It's 1777 Ellis Avenue. The assessed value is $9,676,000. There is a verbal recommendation for $9,442,000. So that's
Okay, what's that?
Pardon me?
What's that based on? What,
Just an agreement on the assessed value.
just an agreement on the back. Okay, and Mr. Slaughter, how do you feel about that?
We'll accept that, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lovenstein understands that we can't fully accept or sign an agreement without the owner's acceptance, and we're still waiting for that, unfortunately. So in cases like this, if we feel that it's fair, we accept on their behalf. But because it's a verbal rec, should they disagree, they have the opportunity to appeal further. If that were the case, I would notify the city immediately so that they're aware, and then they can take appropriate action as well. I don't see that happening.
Okay, thank you. All right, that concludes your portion. Wonder if we can quickly do 1615 King Edward. Can we bring Marcello in?
Yes.
Okay, thanks very much. Nice seeing everybody. Take care. See you, Richard. Thank you. Thanks, Stephen. See you, Marcelo. Yeah.
Mr. Applicant?
I guess we're live, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Please state
We're
your
live.
name.
Marcelo Navarro.
Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated. Mr. Chairman, there was rebuttal submitted for this application. I'm going to send that off to the assessor. Right, a second.
Okay,
There was also a last minute request for the brief to be resubmitted as well. The statement made was the page numbers.
In case the page numbers are missing.
Oh, okay, so looking at the two, it looked like they were the same, so
The numbers are there.
yeah, so if that's acceptable, then the original submission will be.
Yeah, because I guess for some reason, the copy I had didn't have numbers on it. I don't know. It's more of an issue, I think, for the board than it is for me.
okay, I'm just trying to find the city's brief on it. There we go. Okay, finally. So many things labeled the same. All right, Mr. Lobenstein, we've got limited time, so let's be brief and to the point.
Do my best. All right. So the roll number is 070109141000 1615 King Edward Street. The assessed value is $15,235,000. There's 10 I guess, buildings on here, although they're all connected. So they've been built at different periods of time. As you can see, the actual year built and the effective years built range from 1960 to 2004. We have an effective year built of 1973. The wall heights range from 10 feet for office area and up to 38 feet for the industrial area. The zoning is M2. The land area is 598,652 square feet. And the leasable area is 264,434 square feet for a land to plan of 2.12. So, like I said, there has been 10 different buildings constructed on this property, ranging from 1960 to 2004. I can go through them all if you like and tell you the exact square footage and wall height. There is a lot, but I would say that approximately half of this building has been constructed since, prior to, or after 1997. So there's a lot of, the other half is constructed between 1960 and 19. Going forward, this is an owner-occupied building. So these are my rent comparables. You can see, because of the size of this property at 264,434 square feet, you have to really broaden out your search in the city of Winnipeg. So we're looking at properties on Inkster, Fife, and Hutchings. That's all in the Inkster Industrial Park. 1,000 King Edward is probably, well, maybe the closest in proximity to the subject property. And then 1370 Sony Place is out Fort Garry, and 1093 Sherwin is fairly close to the subject property as well. You can see these rents range from $3.40 a square foot up to $5.90, or up to $6.33 a square foot for Sony Place. And the lease starts are from 2014 to up to 2020, or actually 2008 up to 2020. And they range from 2 years all the way up to 20 years. And the effective years of these properties range from 1964 all the way up to 1988, which is very similar to the subject property. So on my page 4, we can now look at the income stream for this property. We're applying $4.45 a square foot. We have a vacancy of 7%. The expenses are 3%, and overall capitalization rate of 6.5% for this property, to get our value of $15,235,000. Again, our capitalization rate charts on page 6. We've gone through this. You can see the 80th, I guess without Marcelo, we've gone through this with Marcelo. You can see the 20th to the 80th percentile is 5.55 to 7.45. And again, going to my page 8, you can see the map of where it's located. So it's basically right on the corner of Notre Dame and King Edward. Page 8 gives you an aerial view of this property. Page 9 gives you some side looks of this property. As you can see, it's quite a vast structure right on the corner of King Edward and Notre Dame. This is owner occupied, so I did supply the mailer on page 11, but it's obviously not rented out or leased out. My outside sources again start on page 12. So we feel with the rent comparables, a similar size, age, location for the most part, and lease term, along with the 6.5% cap rate, applying our 7% and our shortfall and our 3% vacancy, we feel the value of $15,235,000 is fair and equitable. Thank you.
Okay, questions, Marcello?
Yes. My first line of questioning relates to page 3, and those are the rent comparables that you've used. And the first question is, if a property is redeveloped, would you say that a new rent would reflect a higher rent based on the redevelopment of the property versus what it was previously?
I mean, yeah, if a property was redeveloped and renovated, it would probably generate a higher rent, correct?
Okay, okay. So in looking at some of your comparables, and I submitted a rebuttal on one of them in particular, just because I wanted to isolate one of them in particular. But reviewing some of the data on rent comparables that you have, the first comparable at 1750 Inkster was redeveloped. There was even a partial demolition beginning in 2014. So most of that building was redeveloped. Were you aware of that?
Well, we still have an effective year built of 1970 on it,
So yes, I believe the effective age doesn't reflect what's actually there, unless the city hasn't looked at this. But if you do a permit search, you can clearly find out that that some of these properties have been redeveloped.
well, and that's fair, but I don't think that's any different from the subject property today. As I pointed out in the construction throughout the years, they have.
Yes, yes. The subject was constructed in stages. Now, in terms of 10 Hutchings, again, we found the same thing. There was fairly extensive redevelopment there. And, you know, for the most part, 1000 King Edward is almost not the same property it was, you know, when it was the single occupant Safeway. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, the property definitely has gone through renovations, yeah.
Okay. Now, you agree that our property is a single tenant property, correct? Or a single, an occupant property?
Yep.
Would you say that there's more risk involved in that?
I've heard arguments both ways on this. I've heard that multi-tenant properties are higher risk because more tenants have, you do lose more tenants, so you have higher vacancy, where if you just have one tenant.
Right. Let me,
like,
if you want, I can rephrase it.
Sure.
Would you say that a single tenant property of this size would carry more risk in it?
I think a single tenant property at 200 or over 200,000 square feet. Yeah, if you lose your tenant, then it's going to be more difficult to fill that up afterwards. There's fewer tenants who want that size of space.
Exactly. And would you agree that there's probably more demand for tenancies of smaller properties, say in the 50 to 100,000 square foot range?
50 to 100,000. I can't really answer to the demand in the market right now for something like that.
Okay, but just to reiterate, a property this size does carry a lot more risk in terms of you lose your tenancy, you effectively have to redevelop this property, correct?
Possibly, but multi-tenanted carry a different type of risk. It's hard to compare the two.
Okay. Now, we've observed a few properties here in your rental list. And for the most part, they've been redeveloped, correct? Hutchings, King Edward, 750 Inkster. You can go on. There's quite a few properties. There's quite a few large properties in the northwest sector, large properties that have effectively been redeveloped.
I mean, I think all properties similar to the subject property all get updated and get renovations or expansions. I don't think that's uncommon.
Okay. And there would be additional costs involved in redeveloping, correct?
Yeah, to redevelop, yeah, it costs money to build new buildings or to renovate property without a doubt.
Okay, so the next set of questions relate to page 6, and this is your cap rate report.
Sure.
So you have two headings here. One is the 80th percentile and the 20th percentile. So for the 80th percentile, that's basically saying that 80% of properties fall under this. So under 745, and the 20th percentile says 20% of the properties fall under 5.5. That's correct?
Yeah, that's the range. All the properties between the 20th and the 8th percentile are between 5.5 and 7.4.
Okay. So we can agree that there's a range there actually between 5.5 and 7.45, correct?
And that's where the majority of the properties in the city of Winnipeg fall.
Okay,
That place-
and that would include your A's and your B's?
That includes all.
Okay. And are there properties that actually are above 7.45?
There are, yeah.
Okay. I don't know if you can validate this, but I've actually seen a few that are over 9, correct?
Over 9%.
Yeah.
I would have to look at the information. I don't have that in front of me right now.
I wouldn't lie to you, but I have seen these.
I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying I
Okay.
don't have it with me.
Yes.
So I can corroborate what you were saying.
Okay, that said, effectively here, what we have here is we have a range for your A's and B's from 5.55 to 7.45. And there is clearly a set of properties that are above the 7.45. Correct.
I mean, you're
Okay.
going to find your highly depreciated properties when you get to that range.
Okay,
Find properties that are probably older than 1940. Again, heavy manufacturing. Yeah, those properties will definitely carry
Okay.
a higher cap rate.
great. Now, in terms of, there was previously a couple of other headings here, a high and low.
Yeah.
Previously, correct? Those were just removed?
Yep. Those were
Okay.
Marcello, I would remind you that we're strapped for time here. They need this room at 1 o'clock, so.
Okay, that was my, that was it.
There-
Those are my questions.
Okay, Richard, questions?
None, thanks.
Okay, Gail?
No, I have no questions. Thank you.
Okay, Marcello, you can proceed then.
I had a short rebuttal. I don't know if you want to do that or do it later.
The
The rebuttal comes after.
My-
Rebuttal will get after your evidence.
Okay, sounds good.
My apologies, Mr. Chair. The room is free.
The
From
room
this
is
app-
free?
Yes.
Oh, all right, good.
Okay,
All right, so you give your evidence in chief, then we'll do the questions and then you can do your rebuttal.
great. Okay. So this is 16 King Edward Street, and for the sake of saving time, I'm just gonna lightly go over this information. We're requesting a reduction to 13,358,000. You can see the property details there as well, but we've already gone over the property. Intended use of the report, intended users, you can read that. The scope of the work in terms of the inspection, I inspected the property personally on August 30th. Assumptions and limiting conditions, we can probably turn to page 6 where we see the property site map and photographs. Okay, so if anyone is familiar with this property, it's on the corner of Notre Dame and King Edward Street. There is a set of lights there, so to exit out of this area, you need to hit the set of lights to go either north or south on King Edward. If that is not an option for you at 3:30 because of traffic flows, you can go around to Border Street and then to, I believe, Dublin, and then hit King Edward that way. But again, you're going to hit another set of lights, and depending on traffic flows, it's going to be, it may be a situation going either north or south. So in that sense, I've said that, access and egress is not as good as some other locations. In terms of the property and land description, on page 8, you can see the breakdown and the percentages of the property, and you can look at those on your own time. And as Stephen was saying, this property was developed in stages. Although the largest portions were actually the original portions, if you'll note in the chart. Highest and best use is its current use as an industrial building. In terms of the analysis and the approach to value, we're obviously going with the income approach. We have a set of comparables here in terms of the rent. We've decided on a rent of $4.40 per square foot, which is not that different from the assessor's rent. Similar types of comparables. I believe we probably used a couple of similar comparisons there. Inventory and vacancy. In terms of vacancy, there is no dispute, so I'm just going to jump around that section. And in terms of the cap rate, you'll see that in the cap rate section, we have a chart here indicating that our Class A's are between 6 and 650, Class B 650 and 750, and the non-investment grade properties are above 8. In the capitalization rate, in the capitalization report that I've also submitted as evidence there, you will see the change in compression between the last cycle and this cycle to show that we actually have compressed these cap rates. Now, we're also saying that we have a similar argument as what the city is doing in terms of the way that they've presented their cap rates, because again, they've created a range of 5.55, if I'm not mistaken, and 7.45. Now that includes all of their properties, Class A's and B's. And I will note that most of the properties in Winnipeg are Class B's, not Class A's. There are obviously Class A's, but the bulk, I would say, are in Class B range. That said, again, we have a Class B range of 650 to 750, and again, 8. Now, the city has presented a range between 5.55 and 7.45. At the top end, it's at 7.45. At the top end, ours is at 7.5. So again, there's a lot of similarities in the way that we've presented these capitalization rates. We've also accounted for a category known as non-investment grade. In our cap report that we've submitted as evidence, we actually try and tackle the definition of this non-investment grade grouping. There is no real definition of it. We've made an attempt at it, but as the assessor has also noted, that there are some properties that are clearly above the 8% range and 7.45 range. So they do exist. Now in page 23, you'll see my workup, and we have a leasable area of 264,434 square feet. Potential income of 1,163,510. We've applied a 7% cap rate. Again, we've agreed on that. An effective market income of 1,082,064. We've applied the 7% non-recoverables, so this accounts for non-recoverable expenses plus the 2% that was previously there. Whereas the city is now applying 3%. The shortfall rate, we have no contention with the $3.85 that is noted by the city's own study. So we've put in the same shortfall amount rate. Our net operating income comes to $735,054, and we've applied a 7% cap rate. So the difference is essentially 50 points on the cap rate.
Sorry to interrupt. Did you say 735?
935.
935,054. Yeah, and the cap rate is 7%. So we come up with an income value of $13,357,921. And so we are requesting a decrease to $13,358,000.
Okay, is that your presentation?
That is that portion of the presentation, yes.
Okay, let's do questions on the presentation. Mr. Levinson.
I just one more out of curiosity, just on your page 12, index 4, 820 Berry Street. It it's got a $2 rent. What is that? Like, I've never really seen a $2 rent. What's in there that's operating there? Can you tell me that's having a net rent? Because that seems substantially lower than all your other rents.
Yeah. I mean, it's the outlier. I mean, it would be like the 340 that's on your list, I would say.
I've never seen it before, so I'm just wondering what it is. So, okay. All right, those are all my questions.
Okay, Richard, questions?
No, I'm fine, thanks.
Gail?
No, I have no questions either. Thank you.
Okay, Michelle, you can do your rebuttal then.
Okay, the rebuttal. So please tell me if you have it, and you have it open to page 2.
Let me see, rebuttal.
Page 2 of the rebuttal.
This is says, sir, you received the email?
Yes.
I have it, yes.
Just a matter of finding the right one. Unrecoverable.
It'll be the last one of the list of items of 5.
Oh, yeah, about an hour ago. Okay, now we got it. Go ahead.
Okay. So the reason for including this rebuttal is to hone in I guess put some emphasis on this point that I was trying to make when we were going over the rental comparisons and the issue of redevelopment. And does the property actually achieve a higher rent once it's been redeveloped? Well, it's common sense. Yes, it will achieve a higher rent. The developers have put money into this property. They're not going to be charging the same rent they were previously when it was a single occupant building. That's common sense. Now, as we noted in our presentation, or my presentation, and we had the breakup or the breakdown of the spaces in the property, and we went through them, or we didn't go through them, but there was a chart there. The bulk of the building was actually built in 1960. And there's no question that there's been capital repairs over time, and that's why it has a 1973 effective age. But let's be clear that just over half of it, I think, is 1960 design. Now, in terms of the comparison that I've used here to make my point, it is 1000 King Edward Street. And I know this property as the old Safeway warehouse. I used to do picking here as a teenager. I know this property really well. And when I went away from Toronto, or to live in Toronto and came back, I realized that this property had been completely renovated. Now, you have a picture of it here. You have the old lease there about halfway through the page. Now, I don't know if that was an actual lease. Safeway was the single occupant. That's another question altogether. If you turn over the next page, you can see the property as it existed at one time, and you can see those open receiving doors. So basically the trailers drove into this place, okay? On the next page over, and I guess this would be page 4, and page 4, you can see again the property as it existed in the top picture. And in the second picture, you can see how it's been redeveloped. Now, this property is not what it was before. I mean, you obviously can see you have normal shipping doors here with levelers. You drive right up to it. You don't drive into it like you used to. On page 5, you can see the office addition there, which didn't even exist before. So the point that this tries to make is that the rents reflect, the redevelopment. This is why the rents in some of these properties are higher than, say, the rent that we applied for the subject. The assessor has adjusted the rent also, but just to note that this is something that affects the rents that and the way we look at them. So when we use comparisons, we need to make sure that we are comparing apples to apples. This is now a multi-tenanted property that's been highly redeveloped versus a property that is it's had some additions at different times, but it is a single tenant property. A large section of it is from 1960. And many of the issues that are common are coming up. There are mechanical issues. They're entering the end of their life in a lot of cases. In my walkthrough, I was able to see this is not a property that looks like a new property. So it shows the age actually shows. That is my rebuttal.
Okay, Mr. Lamb's questions on the rebuttal?
I don't have any questions, just gonna say that just to me, it seems like the rebuttal evidence shows that this property is brought up to similar standards to what the subject property already is through its renovations. You can see they
Okay.
have similar loading docks to the rebuttal evidence, that's all.
All right, Richard, any questions?
No, thanks.
Gail?
No, I have no questions. Thank you.
All right, a brief summation, Mr. Weinstein.
I have no summation.
Okay, Machillo.
Again, the only summation that I have to make is that the property that we're looking at, which is 1615 King Edward, and having walked through it, is not a property that looks like it's been redeveloped. It looks like an older building when you walk through it. Whereas some of the comparisons that we've looked at are effectively redeveloped properties. That's it.
Okay, thank you for your presentations then. We have heard all the items scheduled and this hearing is now adjourned. So we will shut down everything and then come back and make our deliberations.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Bye, Marcel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.